And now your hosts for this evening, the Rolling Stones. All right, we're back. And hopefully better than ever. Let's see here. All right. So, good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another exciting, thrilling episode. Tonight we're covering what the hell's going on over there?
Don't worry, all is good.
The fire alarm going off in your house, or what are we doing here?
We're just experiencing challenges with water, but I'm here, I am live, I'm ready to go.
Oh, that didn't take long. Well, we're going to attempt to talk about the largest metro area in the Pacific Northwest region of North America. And we're going to cover Seattle and Tacoma tonight in our latest webinar episode. It's great to have you guys with us on this Saturday evening. We have a somewhat small-scale panel tonight, but that's okay, because I like to do shows with a reduced audience of contributors anyway. The man burning down his house in Connecticut right now is very familiar with the roads of the Pacific Northwest and Seattle in particular, and we just like to call him Corco around here. So, good evening, sir.
Good evening, sir. I am delighted to be here. Happy to pretend I know what I'm talking about again. I had the good fortune of living in Seattle for a few years, and am frequently and very often in the area, and I'm delighted to be here.
Well, it's great to have you. Good to talk to you again. I haven't spoken with you in a while, but hope everything is well on your end.
All is good. I didn't burn anything down. I've got hot tea. I am ready to go.
Okay, he's got his tea and he's in business. Very nice. Laura is also here from mdroads.com fame.
Yes, and rather than drinking tea, I'm having some Tim Hortons coffee this evening.
Yes, because at my headquarters, I only drink the finest coffee. So that's what we're having right now. So,
although we really should be having Starbucks. That would be more appropriate for a Seattle episode.
You know what? That is true. I do have Starbucks K-Cups in there if you want one.
I would like one.
So that's our panel for this evening. We're doing with this the three of us, and we'll be doing Seattle and Tacoma. We'll be talking about the freeways of Seattle Metro, and we also have some bridges that we'd like to chat with you about as well, and we'll get to that, plus much more on this new episode. So here we go. Well, we had somebody else who was going to join us tonight, but he unfortunately had to back out. So unfortunately, I am left to fight alone here as far as telling you what's going on GribbleNation.org. I would say simply just go to GribbleNation.org and see what's been posted in the last week. That's my easy answer, because I don't know jack about what's been posted there in the last week. I've been a little busy these past several days, as I'm going to tell you about in the next few minutes. On the YouTube channel front, I can tell you that we're starting to wind down as far as the wave of uploads from the Carolinas is concerned. I think we've only got another day or so of uploads, if I'm not mistaken. And then we're going to be starting with some new stuff. I think I'm going to start expediting some stuff from Georgia from January, getting some of that out on the channel. The predictable stuff that everybody would probably want to see, so the Atlanta Metro and some other stuff as well. I'm going to try to fast track as much of that stuff as I can. And we'll kind of see what happens. We'll see how that goes, because last weekend, over the President's Day holiday, you will know that there was no episode. Everybody was off for the week, and I took that opportunity to do a little bit of traveling myself. And if you guys are watching this live, you are the first ones to know about a little holiday weekend adventure that I went on deep in the heart of Texas. Because I had nothing better to do, and I had a few days to spend, and I thought, well, let's see if I can knock out some more stuff from the southern states this winter. So please welcome our newest major additions to the catalog as far as metropolitan areas in the United States are concerned. Austin, Texas joins the catalog. The state capital of Texas, the city has a population of about 960,000. One of the fastest growing metro areas in all of America as far as the rate of population growth between the last two census. Real neat city to explore, but you got to make sure you bring your toll tag with you, as those toll roads are not cheap. They're not cheap with the toll tag, but they're also way more expensive if you're paying by plate instead. Also, please welcome San Antonio, one of the 10 largest cities in America by population. Crossroads point in south central Texas at Interstates 10 and 35 and 37. Really interesting city. Lots of great road-related highlights and landmarks. Was not expecting it to be as fun as it was, so that was a lot of fun. Now, normally, I would tell you that one of those two cities was the best part of the entire 4-day period that I spent in Texas, between February 19th and the 22nd. However, being a bridge engineer, I actually think that the Corpus Christi side trip that I took on one of those days was actually the highlight of the trip. This picture shows you the progress on the US 181 Corpus Christi Harbor Bridge project, which has been underway since 2018. It's kind of made headlines over the last couple of years for the wrong reasons, but construction is back underway, and Texas DOT is optimistic that the project will be complete in 2024. When complete, it will be the largest cable-stayed bridge in the United States, and it will replace a bridge, the existing bridge on US 181 that was built in the late 50s and is no longer adequate to serve automobile traffic and also freight shipping traffic in the Corpus Christi ship channel. So that's a project for everybody to watch over the next couple of years, and hopefully this thing gets done sooner rather than later. Also, I'd like to take this opportunity, before we move on and before I forget about it, I am going to post a link in the live chat now for you folks. That will send you to the newest podcast episode on the Gribble Nation Roadcast that yours truly recorded earlier this week. This is a recap episode of my travels in Texas. So if you would like to hear more about exactly what I covered and some of the landmarks that I visited along the way and some of my recommendations and highlights of the trip, feel free to check out this latest episode, which I am going to post in the chat right now. So you can check that out. You can bookmark it. You can listen to it at your own leisure. But please listen to it after you've listened to us, because, of course, we're more important than that podcast episode.
Indeed.
Isn't that right?
We're live right now.
That's
why you should stay with us.
That's what I've heard, yeah. I've heard we're live, right?
Yeah, I think we are, right?
So that is a little project to, that was a little trip to sort of put in the back of your mind as far as additional content that might be coming soon to the channel. But we'll set all of that aside, and we'll focus tonight on the real reason that we're all here tonight, which is Seattle. Nicknamed the Emerald City, it's the single largest city center in the Pacific Northwest of North America. So that includes British Columbia. City population of 737,000. The metro population around Seattle and Tacoma and Everett is about 4 million. I don't know about you, but I suspect that the favorite activity in Seattle is simultaneously drinking coffee while at a grunge concert. I don't know if Corco has done that himself. He can speak for that himself, but I suspect that he's done that on at least a couple of occasions. Did we lose him? I don't know. Where did he go? Where did he go? All right, maybe he did burn down his house. I don't know.
Well, that's unfortunate.
We're not even. We're 15 minutes into this, and it's already gone off the rails. Okay.
Sounds like a normal night for us.
Yeah, exactly. Its economy was originally based around logging and whaling. Over the years, it became a major hub for the northwestern termini of the National Railroad system, so it became a major port city for both the import and export of goods. Celebrity figures you may have heard of, such as Bill Gates and Jimi Hendrix, have called Seattle home at some point or another. A global technology and aviation hub, SeaTac is the home of companies such as Microsoft and Boeing. And also, I'm sure we'll touch on this again at some point or another, but this region's proximity to the Cascadia subduction zone makes it very prone to large-scale earthquakes, which have not happened during the course of settlement by Westerners, but it's believed that this kind of thing is certainly capable of happening in modern times. But maybe we'll talk more about that in a little while. Well, I don't know where Corco disappeared to.
I know, because he's one of our sports experts when it comes to Seattle.
Well, I was hoping he'd be able
Wait,
to...
can you...
You're
Did
here.
I disappear? Oh, or... Hello?
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 Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I have my microphone muted, so I'm an idiot. So there we go.
Well, I mean... As I said, you know, we're about 15 minutes into this show and it's already gone off the rails, and there's only 3 of us.
I'm already angry at this slide, but I'll let you speak to it.
I don't know. Well, you know, I'll do some talking, but I'm not quite sure what you could possibly be angry about. I mean, after all, Seattle has a wide diversity of pro sports franchises. The Seattle Seahawks have won the Super Bowl in the last 10 years. The Seattle Sounders are the MLS club in Seattle, both of which share... Well, it used to be called Quest Field. I forget what it's called now. The stadium on the south side of downtown. Seattle also has newly added an NHL expansion franchise, the Seattle Kraken. They're in their inaugural season as we speak. The University of Washington Huskies are located on the north side of Seattle, on the other side of the Union Canal. Generally, they tend to be followed for their men's basketball and also football programs. UW is a member of the Pac-12 conference in Division I. I can see why you're a little angry on this.
Well, there's two things I'm angry about. But
well, let's deal with one of these first. Seattle did at one time have an NBA franchise named the Seattle Supersonics. They are no longer. Well, they're still in the NBA. It's just that they don't play in Seattle anymore. They moved to Oklahoma City.
Hold on. The rights to the Seattle Supersonics belong to the city of Seattle.
Okay, so can we? Yeah. So, do you want to explain a little bit about the move to Oklahoma City?
Yeah. So it was sort of a hostile takeover, and a fellow named Clay Bennett, who was determined to move a football team to Oklahoma City because during Hurricane Katrina, the New Orleans Hornets at the time were relocated to Oklahoma City, and they drew fairly well, and so a fellow named Clay Bennett bought the Sonics with the sort of express intent of moving the team to Oklahoma City. The team was doing fine in Seattle. There was no pressing need to move it. Key Arena, where they played, which is now Climate Pledge Arena, where the Kraken played, yeah, it could have used some upgrades. But, it's not like it was a dump. And so folks in Seattle are still incredibly salty about the team that's down there in Oklahoma, and we don't really talk about that or acknowledge that it exists.
Yeah, they're the Oklahoma City basketball team.
I wouldn't even give them that. They're just something down in Oklahoma.
Yeah. Yeah. So the rights to the Sonics history, name, image, and likeness still belong to the city of Seattle.
Yes.
Is that right?
And so, yes, so if Seattle ever, and there is an expiration date on that, I don't know exactly what it is, but yes, if Seattle ever gets a basketball team back, they will be able to reacquire the history of the Sonics.
So they could call themselves the Sonics, basically.
That is what, yes, yep.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Because I think I read somewhere that like the Thunder have some connection to the history as far as team records are concerned, but the Thunder franchise and a potential future Seattle franchise would both kind of share some of the history. I don't know exactly how they would divide that up, but I guess that was part of the settlement that was made when the team left in the first place. But that's getting a little too complicated for my taste, I think. Because I'm not a lawyer, I'm an engineer. And of course, last but not least, the Major League Baseball franchise in Seattle is the Pilots, founded in 1969.
That's not accurate. It's the Milwaukee Brewers are the Pilots, and there's a long and complicated story behind that. But there is a baseball team too that.
Oh, you know what? Wait.
Fully admit may not deserve to be on this slide. I'm not disputing that maybe they should be omitted, but they do exist.
I actually put the wrong slide up. My mistake. Here we go. This is a better slide, I think. Yeah, so that's not entirely accurate. You're right. It's actually the Seattle Mariners. My mistake.
So that was an unintentional omission.
Yeah, I just got my slides confused. I'm sorry. But
see, I thought that was a fun joke.
Well,
Yeah. I thought you were making a Mariners joke, which is fair.
I think you are starting to catch on to my sense of humor.
Yes.
Anyway.
I've been a Mariners fan for pretty much my whole life now, and I do not dispute that their claim to being a professional sports team since 2001 is tenuous at best. So that's fine.
Yeah, and I have to say that for the audience listening, this young man is not just a casual Mariners fan. He is very hardcore. I have been to baseball games with this guy in the last year or so.
So have I.
Yeah, you have too.
Yeah.
Against the Mariners.
Of course they involved the Mariners, yeah.
Of course.
So yeah, you're very well versed in team history and all of that, and yeah, I think the point that you were alluding to earlier is that the Mariners have the current longest playoff drought of any of the four major sports franchises. I think that's right.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
That's-
they came pretty close last year, so I don't know.
And here's the thing. I don't want it to end at this point. I don't know what the hell I would do, or frankly, most Mariners fans I know, we've discussed this. Like, we don't know what the hell we'll do if the team actually makes the playoffs. Like, it doesn't work, right? Like, it's like the Cubs winning the World Series and stuff. It's just it kind of kills the whole thing, right? So, I'll probably stop being a fan if they ever make the playoffs. I like the predictable mediocrity that comes with being a Seattle Mariners fan, and I don't know that. Suddenly having all these like bandwagon Mariners fans show up from around the country, it's going to be weird, and I'm not ready for it.
Yeah. Well, I suppose the Mariners had a bit of a bandwagon following in the '90s because of Ken Griffey Jr. and A-Rod and
Oh yeah.
And
Yep.
of course he had a big following with Ichiro. The Japanese audience was watching him.
Yep.
Yeah, so I mean the Mariners aren't really a stranger to having a bandwagon fan base, but yeah, you're right. It would be. I'm not really. I think the universe might explode if the Mariners make the playoffs. So if you're interested in the survival of humanity, I guess you should hope that the Mariners never make the playoffs again.
Darn straight.
The Mariners play at a beautiful ballpark, by the way, T-Mobile Park, south of downtown. There it is on the upper left. It's Lumen Field. That's the name of the stadium that the Seahawks and the Sounders both play in. More or less across the street from T-Mobile Park, in that same general area.
Yep. That's the former site of the Kingdom, is where the Seahawks are.
Okay, yeah.
Yep.
I've got some other views of downtown Seattle up here for you to casually look through. Really interesting skyline. Of course, the highlight of it is the Space Needle, which you can see in the picture in the upper left. Space Needle was built for the 1962 World's Fair, I believe, or it was one of the centerpiece exhibits of that. And it's a nice observation tower that's got, I think it's got a restaurant and a observation deck, and it's very futuristic building.
A revolving restaurant. The restaurant spins.
It does. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. I think that when San Antonio hosted the World's Fair in 1968, they kind of stole all the ideas for the Space Needle and incorporated that into the Tower of the Americas that they have, which is a very similar structure. But the Space Needle did it first in 1962. And this is probably, if it's not my favorite view of the downtown skyline, it's second on the list. This is looking northbound from Highway 99 as you approach the Alaskan Way Tunnel. Yes, the sun does actually come out in Seattle every once in a while, and when it does, the city really sparkles, like it did on this day. Let's take a look at some maps here, just as an overview. On the left, you're looking at a map of the downtown area. You can see how I-90 and I-5 meet at a large interchange at the south end of the downtown area near Chinatown. I-5 moves to the north through the city center. If you take a more regional view, like the map on the right, you can kind of see the general setup of the freeway system. You have I-5, you have I-405 across the east side of Lake Washington, and then you have I-90, which starts its transcontinental journey right near downtown Seattle. And there's a bunch of other freeways that are kind of happening in there that we'll that we'll touch on as well.
It's a system that lends itself to terrible traffic. Just the the geography of the area and where there is water. There's just not a lot of good ways to create a free-flowing traffic situation at all. And so, yeah.
Yeah, they've managed to cram a lot of people into that small land space there between the lake and between the sound. And of course, that doesn't really bode well if you're trying to move people efficiently, I would say.
Yeah, well, you just have a long, skinny corridor that's bounded by mountains on one side and water on the other.
Generally not a lot of room to move or expand in situations like that. I've got some honorable mentions on the screen here. You know, we'll talk about all the other stuff in more detail, but as I put this slide up on the screen, we can run through some of these highways. So, US 2, the western end of the western US Highway 2, which runs from Everett out to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, has its start in Everett at I-5 and continues eastward towards Stevens Pass over the Cascades. Highway 7 forms a short southerly continuation, I would say, of I-705 in Tacoma. Highway 18, we'll talk more about the Seattle Outer Bypass proposal in a little while, but that freeway more or less serves as a connection between the Tacoma area and I-90 west of Snoqualmie Pass. Highway 512 is another one that serves the Tacoma area out through the Puyallup Valley. 522 is another radial expressway in the north and east of Seattle Metro, out north of Bellevue, and running easterly out into the far northeast suburbs. 525 kind of is another freeway for the northwest suburbs. It's not really a freeway. It's the Mukilteo Speedway, I think they call it.
The Mukilteo Speedway. Yep.
Yeah, it's not a racetrack, although people drive it like it's a racetrack. That's just a fancy way for them calling it like a high-speed divided highway, I suppose. 509 and 599 are short freeways that serve the southern suburbs of Seattle, down in the not too far from SeaTac Airport.
And 509 will eventually become a more significant freeway as well.
Are they planning on expanding that at all, or what's the
Yeah, it's still on the books to at some point be a southern airport access. So if you're coming from Tacoma, rather than having to, well, right now if you're smart, you exit on the 272nd, but as opposed to going over to 518, it will. I believe they're in the design process right now on that. Constructing that as a new freeway spur.
Okay.
Yep. See, where is it at? It is. Well, the project timeline is through 2028. So.
All right, so we don't have to worry about a Seattle meet until then.
All right.
Okay, that's good to know. Alright, so that's honorable mentions out of the way. Now we can dive more into some of the other more significant highways crisscrossing the region, and we'll start in probably the most logical place to start, which is I-5. Like I said for the Kansas City show that we did before, you're going to see freeway titles on these slides, but don't really worry about those. Those are the titles that appeared on planning maps back in the 50s and 60s. Nobody really calls I-5 in Seattle the Central Freeway and some of the other freeway names that you're going to see along the way, but they are there for your reference in case you're interested more in the planning angle of some of this stuff. So as we get started with I-5, it is the primary north-south highway through central Seattle. This road has a really interesting reversible express lane system that runs you basically from the I-90 junction up across the canal bridge and up towards the University of Washington. Let's see here. Yeah, so the general use lanes follow the upper level of the Ship Canal Bridge, and the lower level lanes are the express lanes that again are reversible. The express lanes work if you're in the right place at the right time, and you can take advantage of them. Obviously, with them being reversible, they point in the direction of peak traffic. So you kind of have to time it pretty well, but they are a very interesting alternate to the general lanes, and they are not toll lanes. I should specify that they're not. There's no toll to cross them or drive them. They're just there as an additional reversible roadway to handle peak traffic conditions on I-5. And Laura's going to talk more about I-5 history.
Yeah, so I-5 was one of the earlier expressways that was built after the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956. So the first section to be built was the Ship Canal Bridge, which we'll talk more about later, but it's a double-decker bridge over the Lake Washington Ship Canal between the University District and East Lake, and that construction began in August of 1958. I-5 construction was delayed in downtown Seattle after 100 citizens marched on 6/1/61 to protest its trench design. They advocated and sought for officials to add a lidded tunnel with a rooftop park because basically what I-5 does is, separates Capitol Hill and First Hill from downtown. And so while their efforts delayed, delayed the project for a year. Basically, the design was deferred for later consideration. However, the design didn't change. And the officials completed the land acquisition the next year in June 1962 and built it with, the original design. And this was, unfortunately, some really important buildings got demoed despite this opposition. The Kalmar Hotel, which dated from 1881 and predated the Seattle fire, was lost, as well as the 7th Avenue Fire Hall, which dated to 1890 and was the oldest public building in Seattle. So, basically, I-5 was finished in downtown Seattle by 1967, and while citizens failed to stop or lid I-5, it inspired them to fight harder and to make sure that it didn't happen again with other roads, which I'll, cover a little shortly with I-90.
Yes, we do also have another segment called Unbuilt Freeways that I'm sure this subject is going to come up with as well.
Yeah, that's sort of in my expertise. I feel like this is my contribution to the channel is this planning history. That's the thing that I guess really inspires me as I now work as a town planner, but my background in city planning and in transportation planning is the communities and how they fought, and advocated for their neighborhoods to not be destroyed, and and seeing the effects, the successes and the failures of this across cities, and the importance of that, and just how it plays out, because unfortunately, as we know, some areas were more successful than others. Basically, if you were rich in a predominantly white neighborhood, your neighborhood was more likely to be spared than if you were in a low-income and minority neighborhood.
Corco, what do you want to say about I-5?
No, I would echo a lot of what Laura said. I guess some of the interesting mechanical stuff is that it is almost perpetually under construction in Tacoma. It looks like maybe they finally finished
That's not
that
a joke either.
in the last image that you showed. And I suppose we're going to talk about 16 later, which has some interesting. There'll be more to discuss at that point. I think one of the interesting things about I-5 through downtown Seattle is they have, partially in response, I think, to some of the community concerns, they did cap portions of it. There's a very large park that spans over the top of I-5. The convention center is portions of that are on top of I-5. And I think they've. While I completely agree with Laura that, and with folks that are not interested in seeing historic buildings go away and neighborhoods split, I do think that, to Seattle's credit, they did a better job than many other places in terms of sort of reconnecting the neighborhoods back on top. And so that's, I guess, a good thing.
Oh, definitely. And everything you just mentioned about I-5, I think, is inspired by, so while they didn't initially, cap over some of these areas, the capping the parts of I-90 and, I think later, inspired, some of the stuff to go on with I-5. And, Seattle, I think Seattle, too, is kind of a poster child for, hey, how can we get these roads built in a more, environmentally sensitive way? Sort of where the city that pioneered that.
Yeah, kind of how the term context sensitive came about. Really has its roots in the Pacific Northwest, and in particular in Seattle, but also, to a lesser extent Portland, but also Seattle as well. Speaking of context sensitive, I think that there's no better example in Seattle of building a freeway in a sensitive area that managed to please as many people as possible as the construction of I-90 across Lake Washington and into downtown Seattle. There's a lot to talk about as far as the design of this highway. I'll just give you a brief overview of the corridor by saying that it is the western terminus of I-90. 3,000 miles to the east, it reaches its eastern terminus in East Boston, Massachusetts. This design went through many different iterations over the course of about 30 years. The section, particularly across Mercer Island and on the south side of downtown, went through a lot of different design changes due to the Seattle Freeway revolts and the environmental movement of the 1970s. And the design that emerged and was constructed is ultimately a giant compromise between city planners, residents, and environmental activists, and can really be seen as a triumph and a success story rather than a long-delayed project that should have been built years ago. I know that the latter opinion is shared by a lot of people, but I prefer to see this as a great example of compromise and construction in a sensitive manner that manages to serve the needs of everybody in the community. And then the other thing I would like to say before I turn Laura and Corco loose on this is the great express lanes versus light rail debate. And I know you guys know what I'm talking about when I say that. So please go ahead.
Who wants to start? Maybe Corco, because you've actually probably,
Yeah. I mean, so there's space for additional laneage along the I-90 corridor, and over the years there's been discussion of whether those lane capacity areas are better served by express lanes or by light rail. And as the light rail system over the last decade or so has started to increase in capacity and has started to become a real thing and not just lines on a map, there has been interest in expanding the light rail system such that occupies that space, and so it's kind of a done deal at this point, as far as I know. And the determination's been made that having an express or a light rail to Bellevue is more valuable than having express lanes, but certainly a point of contention.
Yeah,
to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, right. Yeah. I think the big thing is, so when the express lanes were in their, initial configuration from 1992 to 2017, they carried about 15,000 vehicles per day. And, so the new light rail line, which is scheduled to open in 2023, is expected to carry 50,000 riders by 2030. So, that's even if every one of those 15,000 cars, had three people in it, that's, still less than that 50,000. So, the hope is that but with the light rail line, that they're really increasing the amount of usage of those lanes and the movement of people.
Yeah, and the thing that I'd like to emphasize at this point is that when you drive around Metro Seattle on the freeways, so I-5, 90, 405, even the east end of either 520 or 522, one of those two, you're seeing a lot of new construction of light rail. Seattle has been very aggressive in developing and constructing a planned light rail system that will serve all of the population centers in the SeaTac region. Specifically, downtown Seattle with Seattle Airport, which we'll talk more about that project in a few minutes, but also out to Bellevue and the major suburbs on the eastern shore of Lake Washington. Seattle has been very late to the party as far as the development of a mass transit system is concerned, and with a metro population of about 4 million, it is a glaring gap as far as the portfolio of transportation options for the region are concerned. And so Seattle recognizes this deficiency and has been very aggressive in trying to develop and construct a system that is, again, suitable to the needs of the region. And one of the points of contention with the I-90 corridor in particular is that they're taking away already existing traffic lanes in order to make the light rail system feasible along I-90. But again, it really depends on ridership. If the ridership of the light rail across Lake Washington ultimately is comparable to or replaces even the amount of traffic that was using the express lanes in the first place, then I would have to say that the project was worth the investment from the get-go and was proven to be a more efficient way of moving people. Ultimately, we won't know that for several years after its completion, but it's an interesting idea of using existing real estate in a different manner. There aren't too many examples of this happening in America today, so it's an interesting experiment to watch and see how it unfolds as it enters service in a couple of years.
Yeah. Well, and one thing to note is that that sort of adds to the fire. So I lived in Seattle before the light rail existed, and I've been back many times since it has existed. But the thing with Seattle is it has a exceptional regional bus system. Sound Transit, sort of an agglomeration of all the three counties, King, Pierce, and Snohomish counties, transit systems, and have just a phenomenal bus system. And some of the argument against the light rail investment is that, when they added the light rail between the airport and Seattle, for instance, they also removed the direct bus lines that were also serving it, they serve less passengers, but were actually faster to get from downtown to the airport. But that's neither here nor there. So much of it is perception, right? It becomes the sort of people aren't comfortable on buses, but they are comfortable on light rail infrastructure, and so I think that's had a lot to do with some of the emphasis on light rail and shift away from buses. But also, obviously, Seattle has grown very rapidly in the last 15 years, and so there's a need for this that didn't exist before. So that's good. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't realize that Seattle was one of the fastest growing metro areas in the country. up
Yeah.
until,
Yep. Yep.
I mean, certainly with the 2020 census data confirms that. I would not have guessed that Seattle was one of the 5 fastest growing metro areas in America, but it is. It's a hotbed for high tech, as we said, at the onset, with Microsoft and all the computer industry stuff, and Nintendo is based out that way, and obviously Boeing is out that way, so they have a huge presence in the area. So I guess in that, when you frame it that way, it's not really much of a surprise, but it is. It's refreshing to see that Seattle Metro is doing what they can to try to head off some of this development by adding in some transit options for this growing community. Before I forget, the one thing I want to mention here, you're looking at it on the slide that we have right now, the bridges over Lake Washington. The state of Washington is home to 4 floating bridges. You're looking at 2 of them in this slide. There's one for eastbound I-90 and there's one for westbound I-90. The floating bridges here date back to, I believe, 1940 when the first one was built, the Lacey-Murrow Bridge, which was eventually incorporated into I-90. When I-90's construction actually took place, a parallel bridge was built in the late 1980s. And that dual-span bridge carries I-90 across Lake Washington. These 2, as I said, are floating bridges. The depth of Lake Washington prohibits the placement of deep fixed foundations at the bottom of the lake. So you have, in this situation, a very unique engineering challenge of having to build a bridge in a situation where you can't really moor or drive piles into bedrock, presumably, to build a bridge in a traditional sense. So basically what you have here is you have a lot of immersed tunnel sections or immersed tube sections that are joined together, and their buoyancy is regulated by air pressure, and they are linked together in a series or in a train, if you will, and that forms basically a long barge, if you will, that becomes a bridge deck. And that's basically the general gist of it.
Yeah, no, the second bridge was completed in 1993.
1993, okay.
Yeah, so 1940 and 1993. Although, as they were building, building, the eastbound bridge, the Lacey-Murrow westbound section, a section of it broke apart during a storm during its renovation in November of 1990. So.
Yeah, I think that what happened there was that it had something to do with strong winds on the lake, and they didn't properly account for that in their buoyancy calculations.
Yeah.
It had something to do with that.
Right, because basically, because what was happening was that, they had the, so they built the one bridge, and then built the new bridge, and then we're repairing the older bridge, and that's when that happened.
Yeah. Yeah, there's actually video of that. If you go on YouTube, I forget what, if you look at Lake Washington Bridge sinks or something like that on YouTube, you go to the YouTube and you search that. There's something to that effect.
You can find anything on YouTube.
Hey, you can. Listen, in the last few days, especially since Thursday, if you know what I mean, you've been able to find a lot of shit on YouTube.
Yes, yes. Well, before you move off of this slide real fast.
Go ahead.
I just want to say that, going back very quickly to the talk about light rail versus, express lanes, even though the reversible express lanes on the floating bridge were closed in 2017, they did replace them with high occupancy lanes, vehicle lanes.
Yeah, so what we're looking at, so if you look at this slide, you'll notice this is a picture of each direction of I-90 across the lake. You'll notice that each of the left lanes in each of these pictures is now striped as an HOV lane. I assume that is not original. That was part of the closure of the express lanes and the moving of that traffic over to quote unquote the general roadway. Is that kind of the gist of that?
That's correct. And one thing to just point out with HOV lanes in Washington State is they function a little bit differently than a lot of places, in that you can get in and out anytime you want. There are no designated entry or exit points, which is kind of makes it fun. So people, they may not work as well, but that's fine.
Right, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because these lanes function like that. That's how they're intended to function, even though on the roadway they are striped as if that's not their intent. You see the solid line, for instance. So they're really striped a lot like Arizona's HOV lanes, like around Phoenix. You see this a lot, where you have the solid stripes separating the HOV and the general lanes. But Arizona has a similar intent that you can jump in and out whenever you want, even though the striping does not conform to that intent. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right.
Like what they should be doing is what Tennessee does, which is what I really like, which is they stripe it like, you know, the general lanes, but they use a different striping pattern to indicate that, yes, you can jump in and out, but be aware that this is technically a different set of lanes that you're entering or you're crossing between. I wish that they would make the Tennessee version national standard, to be honest with you. In all my travels, I find the Tennessee version to be the most easily recognizable and the easiest to interpret.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I have experience traveling to Nashville, you know.
Yeah.
Especially recently, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Just
One last thing before you jump to 405.
Well, you can start talking about 405 too. You can jump into that.
Yeah.
also.
No. I was just gonna say. I know we covered the in-depth history of I-90 in Seattle in the previous, in the I-90 drive episode. But if later, I'd love to dig back into that again. If we, if Dan decides to show some more, footage.
Are you requesting a special video from me?
Maybe. Although I am excited for my surprise. I have a surprise planned when Dan shows the 405. Shows some 405 footage later.
Yes, I have negotiated with Laura, and she has a little surprise in store for us.
Indeed.
For the video portion of tonight's program.
For the 405.
Yeah, the other 405.
The other 405, yeah.
When we talk about the 405, I'm sure most of you automatically associate that with Los Angeles. There are 3 I-405s in existence today. One in California that everybody knows about and everybody loves to hate. There's this one in the eastern suburbs of Seattle, and there's also a little tiny one in Portland, which we'll talk about in a forthcoming webinar.
Yeah, and most popular songs that reference the 405 are referencing the 405 in LA. But I'm going to reveal the surprise now. You'll have to stay tuned.
I think you kind of spoiled part of it there.
Yeah. So,
but what do you want to say about this 405?
This 405. Well, I could read the slide, but or Corco could go.
Okay.
I don't have a lot other than my super secret surprise.
Well, yeah, I guess it's been Seattle's busiest freeway for a while. I suppose I can chime in. Even when I was living there 15 years ago, it was still widely known that if you needed to get from Tacoma to Everett, you just took I-5 as opposed to jumping on 405. But yeah, I don't know that I have a whole lot to say on 405. It's a fairly standard suburban freeway for the most part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think conceived the bypass of downtown Seattle.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing to take from the 405 in Seattle is that this was a freeway that when they drew it up in 1960, they did not anticipate Renton and Bellevue becoming the edge cities that they've become. And so they said, well, we'll just send the bypass around the east side of Lake Washington and that'll be the end of it. Well, that's where Microsoft comes in, and that's where Nintendo comes in, and they built their headquarters out that way. And then, before you know it, you've got these cities like the one on the left picture sprouting up overnight, all around the corporate headquarters of Microsoft. So, really what the 405 has turned into is I-5 2.0 for the east side of Lake Washington. And I believe as far as traffic per capita or traffic per lane mile, I-405 is the busiest freeway in Seattle. Obviously not the way they drew it up because, again, as its number suggests, it was always meant to be a bypass of I-5 through downtown Seattle. But obviously fate had other plans. There is a widening project I'd like to mention real quick, and that is a project that began this year. Express toll lanes and additional general use lanes will be built on a corridor between the State Highway 167 interchange in Renton and I believe as far north as State Highway 520 in the Bellevue area, which is a pretty lengthy stretch of highway. I think it's about 10 miles in all. New express toll lanes will be built. The hope is that they will be able to provide at least some sort of free-flowing traffic capacity to that entire stretch of the 405 by the time it's complete around the year 2025.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess the only thing I would add is that I suppose this is sort of a it's not surprising that 405 is busier than 5. It is really the only freeway on the east side of the valley, which is generally a lot more single family homes, a lot more sort of suburban office headquarters and things like that. There's just a lot more demand for automobiles on this side of the lake, and so that follows that there's more traffic.
Yeah,
and that there's reason to have express toll lanes, right? There's folks on this side of the lake that are more likely to be willing to pay for such a thing. So
that is true, and that's a pattern that we see in a lot of metro areas across America, not just out this way. I mean, we're seeing it in Virginia with D.C. and the expansion of the toll lanes out in Northern Virginia that's currently being built. We're seeing it in a lot of different places around America. A lot of the same developmental patterns and the socioeconomic patterns hold true in Seattle, just like they do in many other areas around America. So perhaps we shouldn't be surprised that that's exactly the case here. I do, before we move on, I really like these signs in the upper right picture. The signs that you see on the left side, the white signs. The pictures of the bus and the carpool car and all that.
I love it.
Yeah, so Seattle does a good job with diagrammic picture signs like these, where you have, it says it's carpool, but it's also open to buses. And also their express toll lanes have a variation of this signage as well, where they're open to buses and carpools and motorcycles and stuff like that. I wish signs like this had been standard in the METCD when I was a kid, like 30 years ago, because I would have absolutely loved seeing pictures of buses on road signs. It would have been like the best combination possible, because I loved road signs when I was a kid, and I loved pictures of buses.
Yes.
So like seeing like pictures of buses on road signs when I was a little kid would have been like absolute heaven for me. But
well, good news is there's a little kid inside of all of us, so now your inner child gets to Enjoy the signs now.
Maybe Washington DOT is giving rise to a new generation of road geeks.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Maybe one that, is, one that we know whose name is Rainier minus the R. Rainy!
I would say Washington is just a great state to be a road geek in. Like, it's got everything. It has a state highway numbering system that's like logical and makes sense. It's got good consistent signage, but it's got like several different generations of signage all throughout that like change pretty frequently throughout. It's got the floating bridges. It's got ferries. It's got the whole gamut. It's the first state highway system I totally clinched, and that was it got me excited about driving. So
yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't realize that Washington State was the first one.
It was, yeah, because I lived in Tacoma at the time. And, sure.
Corco is like the master of clinched state highway systems. How many have you clinched at this point?
9.
9.
And the vast majority of those have been out west, right?
All except, Washington, Oregon, California, Idaho, Nevada, Montana, Wyoming, Arizona, and Delaware.
Yeah, Delaware.
And of course, the random one in there is Delaware,
which he did in a full weekend.
Yes.
Yeah, well, we'll talk more. Maybe we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Because I know he's working on other states in the Northeast now that he lives out this way.
Yeah.
I have a bone to pick with the Tacoma Mall.
Oh yeah?
Because it's their fault that I-705 exists. In the 1960s, the downtown area of Tacoma experienced a giant exodus of commercial real estate and business traffic out to the suburbs. And a lot of that went to the Tacoma Mall, which is outside of the city limit. In an effort to counter this, the Tacoma City Council petitioned Washington DOT to come up with a scheme to build a downtown connector for Tacoma to link in with I-5 and the Route 16 expressway. And the result is what's known as I-705, which is one of the shorter auxiliary interstates on the whole system. It's barely a mile in length. It was not built until the 80s. It was a very late addition to the interstate and expressway grid in SeaTac Metro. But it does exist, and it's a very useful connection to the central business district of Tacoma and also the port facilities nearby. And that's really the main reason it exists today. And as you can see in the picture on the lower right on this slide, you do get a pretty nice view of downtown Tacoma as you approach from the south on I-5. So, it's not very long. There's not much to it, but it is a bit more memorable than you would expect a 1-mile auxiliary route to be.
Yeah, no, it was actually a new portion of the interstate highway system to be constructed in Washington State and having opened in 1988.
And it was kind of an interesting situation because it opened right as, so if you keep going down to the end of 705 and then you go up to if you go out Chester Parkway, you end up in Ruston. And Ruston is an old company town, and adjacent to that was the Ruston factory, which was actually the first major Superfund site in the U.S., and now has become sort of a redeveloped mixed-use neighborhood. But, I would need to check on the timeline to see if... I believe that they had already decided to decommission that by the time 705 was built. But either way, it serves as an important connector along the waterfront and then beyond just to the central business district, but in combination with Chester Parkway up to Ruston and then Point Defiance Park, which is the biggest park in the Seattle metro area, as far as I know. It's a significant driver of traffic.
Now, Corco, does it cut off the waterfront, or is there still downtown Tacoma waterfront access?
So downtown Tacoma is very industrial, right? You're on the Foss Waterway. All you've got is a very narrow stretch of water that leads to the port of Tacoma. Then as you get further north, past where 705 ends, you end up on on Schuster Parkway, and later the road out to Ruston, which are they're surface streets, and it's generally fairly undeveloped. The way Tacoma is laid out, you've sort of got the road, and then you've got a hill on one side and the water on the right. So you've got a few parks and a couple of restaurants, and then you get up to where the old Ruston factory was, and now they've redeveloped that into condos and things like that. So yeah, I mean it's not terribly connected, but I think that's a function of geography as much more so than a function of the road design.
Yeah, I see. No, I'm looking at a map and I see where there's a lot of trails along Ruston Way, and it looks like there is some waterfront access, past the 705.
Yeah, because that's something else that we like to focus on around here is access to waterfronts and how waterfront access has evolved over the years.
Definitely.
And of course, if you joined us for the Baltimore presentation that we did, we talked at length about how, the value of waterfront property has changed over the years since the inception of the interstate system. Whereas in the 50s and 60s, we were using that as prime real estate to build freeways, whereas in the 2010s and 20s, we're using waterfront property for green space and other recreational purposes. So just in that 60-year span, we've seen the values of urban areas shift dramatically in that extent.
Indeed, and a lot of that comes from when a lot of these highways were first proposed in the 50s, that, the waterfront was being used, for industrial purposes. So build the highway where the industry, where the trucks can get to it and use it. That in that time the waterfront wasn't valued as something that should be accessible to all people, and and that has changed, and that'll come up a little more when we talk about the Alaskan Way viaduct. How that is, there's new waterfront development since that was demolished. But for now,
Corco, what do you want to say about Route 16?
What do I want to say about Route 16? So, beyond the bridge part, which I'm sure we'll talk about, and that's probably the biggest part, the other big deal would be the Nally Valley Viaduct, which is the small stretch of road from about the Union Avenue exit in Tacoma over to I-5, which they reconstructed. It's got to be about 10 years ago now. It used to be a very sort of treacherous merge situation with a tight clover leaf and a lot of accidents and very tight merge ramps. And they tore it down. It was a massive construction project that took a lot of years and essentially built a brand new elevated structure connecting 16 to 5, which is now very modern and fancy and flows very nicely. It's really changed the landscape around there quite a bit. It's a lot taller, a lot wider. You don't have very narrow lanes. They couldn't have been more than 10 feet wide, and it's a totally different game now driving that little stretch.
Yeah, I had the ability to drive that new viaduct in July of 2021, and it's a very nice elevated highway that they've got there now. Obviously, I never got to experience the original structure, but they certainly have done a good job with the reconstruction through there. And what's complete of I-5 around Tacoma, which has been under perpetual construction for the last 20 years, what's complete of it, I mean, most of it is done now. I mean, I think they're on their final phase of construction now around the Tacoma Dome. But what's complete of it to this point has come out very well also. So I know that it's very frustrating for motorists and all that, but the new look freeway system around Tacoma has certainly come out very well, I would have to say.
Yeah, so one interesting tidbit. So, gosh, almost 15 years ago now, 14 and a half years ago. So I went to University of Puget Sound for a while, and I had a job as my job was to drive what was called the Saturday Shuttle. We would take you anywhere in Tacoma and even up to the airport. You went for $1 if you were a student. A good deal, but I got to drive a big van around. But one day in the fall, I was standing outside at Puget Sound, and I was on the clock waiting for a call to go somewhere, and felt like an earthquake, a massive earthquake. And then I got my call to go somewhere, and I get on the old Nally Valley Viaduct at the time, and there's a big foundry down there, the Atlas Foundry, that had exploded and basically lit the the viaduct on fire, which may have expedited its reconstruction. But we had to we had to do it was crazy. We actually went contraflow on 16. We all had to do a U-turn in the middle of the viaduct and drive back out on the westbound and the eastbound lanes. It was quite the experience.
Oh boy!
Wow.
Yeah.
So the one other note I would like to make about 16 before we move on is it includes a major bridge over the Puget Sound. I will for now just refer to it as that bridge.
Ooh.
And I will say to be continued, because we have a lot to talk about as far as that bridge is concerned.
Yeah.
We've been making reference to the Alaskan Way for quite some time, and we've been putting it off until now. So
Woo!
let's talk about Highway 99 and the history of the Alaskan Way, the original viaduct, the new tunnel, and how we got between viaduct and tunnel.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sure. So the Alaskan Way Viaduct was a, double-decker elevated highway that was 2.2 miles long along the Seattle waterfront, which cut it off the waterfront from, the rest of Seattle. It was built between 1949 and 1959. The first section of the highway opened April 4th, 1953. And proposals to replace the viaduct and to restore the connection with the waterfront go back as early as the 1960s and the 1970s.
Geez, so not even 20 years, they
Yeah.
realized that they screwed up.
Yeah, I mean,
Pretty much.
pretty much, right? But
Yeah.
but it goes along with highway trends in pretty much every city. That was the time frame where, in the 40s and 50s, the mindset was, hey, let's, build, because there's two things going on, right? So you're building, let's build on the waterfront because it's in the industrial, these are, at the time, still industrial areas. So, easier access for the trucks, but also, if you're building along the waterfront and in, these industrial areas, you're not knocking down neighborhoods. So at the time that was seen as a better alternative. And, then, but then by the 1960s was part of when we realized across the nation that, hey, but we're cutting off the waterfront. Industry has, we're past its peak on the waterfront, and this could be used as, with recreational access for all people. So yeah, that's where it's in the 1960s is where that,
Is that kind of where the shift happened?
Yeah.
I would like to say that the pictures that you're looking at right now of the old Alaskan Way structure are a conglomerate of pictures that are not mine. I would like to thank Tom Fearer of GribbleNation.org. I'd like to thank Steve Alpert of AlpsRoads.net. And I believe Anthony Costanzo also contributed a couple of these pictures, or at least one of them. He may have contributed this one in the lower right of this slide.
Ooh, button copy.
Yeah, so the original viaduct structure was built back in the days when U.S. Highway 99 still existed in Washington State. And you can see in the lower left of this picture an old U.S. 99 assembly there, still in place. Also, the original viaduct, especially on the upper level, had these very unique-looking overhead gantries, specifically of the design like you see in the upper left picture on this slide. This was a bi-level viaduct built primarily of reinforcing steel and concrete. Very easy to assemble in a hurry, very typical of post-World War II expressway construction in urban areas, especially out in the west coast cities of Seattle, Portland, and say San Francisco. But again, I think really, like as Laura has said, the discussion about getting rid of this thing began not very long after it was completed. The final nail in the coffin for this came in the aftermath of the 2001 Nisqually earthquake,
Yep.
which revealed the fact that this structure is simply not adequate to deal with modern seismic risks. And as we mentioned, and I'll let Laura continue in a minute, and if Corco, if you want to jump in at any time, feel free. This is smack dab in earthquake country. We don't really think of Seattle necessarily as being an earthquake country. I think we in America tend to think of California as being the only state that's really prone to this kind of thing. Seattle is located immediately inland of the Cascadia subduction zone, which has had a history of producing earthquakes on the magnitude of 9.0 or greater. And so we need to be prepared for this enhanced seismic risk. And one of the things that we're moving away from is freeway designs that are particularly vulnerable to seismic design. And one of the early casualties as far as getting rid of a freeway that was high risk was the Alaskan way structure itself.
Yeah, I mean, what it came down to is that even that really there were only, at first it appeared that there were only minor damages to the highway, but after that earthquake, the DOT closed the viaduct twice a year to conduct inspections on the structure, and it was through those inspections that they discovered continuing settlement damage. And basically in 2005, a group of researchers and faculty from the University of Washington urged the political officials to close the viaduct within a 2-year time frame. The experts basically gave a 1 in 20 chance that the viaduct could be shut down by an earthquake within the following decade.
Now, Corco, am I correct that a lot of the sound front or the waterfront there where the original viaduct exists is actually more or less landfill that is very susceptible to liquefaction and settlement?
That is very accurate, though it is worth noting that replacing the viaduct with another viaduct was on the table as a viable alternative as late as like a year before they started design for the tunnel.
Right.
So there was a way to maybe make this work. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, what it came down to is that they had several options. They could do a new elevated freeway, a new viaduct. They could do a surface boulevard instead, and have transit options. They could do a cut and cover tunnel, or they could do a deep bore tunnel, which is what they ultimately chose to do in 2009.
Yeah.
And then the construction of that was between 2013 and 2017, if I have those dates correct. And then in 2019 was when they started to demolish the viaduct. Although there was an older southern section that was demoed in 2011.
I believe you're talking about... Are you talking about the northern extent of the...
No, it was the southern. It was down by where Safeco is, or just south of that,
that's
or
right.
T-Mobile
Okay.
Park. Yeah. They blew that up and turned it into surface streets in preparation, because I believe that's where they started the tunneling, was on the south side, and so they had to tear down part of the viaduct to
I think that's
get Bertha into the hole. Yep.
That's where it transitions from viaduct to tunnel, right in that area.
Yeah.
What you're looking at on this slide is, on the right, you have a schematic of what the tunnel looks like. If you cut a slice through it, and you look at a cross-section of it, Seattle engineers designed a single-bore tunnel that is bi-level. So you have one direction on a lower level, and you have another direction on an upper level. So it's basically kind of a recreation of the original elevated structure, except it's below ground. And when you drive this tunnel, you don't really realize that you are in this kind of a setup. It just automatically feels like you're in a regular side-by-side twin-bore setup, which is the more traditional way to build these kinds of things. But in order to minimize the disruption to the waterfront and surrounding neighborhoods, they elected to build a single bore tunnel, which could be bored using a single tunnel boring machine. And that was the idea behind that was that it would reduce construction costs. However, as they dug, you guys can talk about this more, but as they dug their way through downtown Seattle, they ran into more than a few problems. The tunnel boring machine was not particularly reliable,
Bertha!
and that unfortunately added years to the project timeline. What I want to point out is on the leftmost two renderings here, you're looking at two identical maps of downtown Seattle. On the leftmost, you're seeing the original alignment of the Alaskan Way, which, as you can see, is much closer to the water than where the relocated tunnel alignment is, which runs more or less through the west edge of the central business district. Part of this was due to the fact they wanted to avoid the foundation areas of the existing viaduct. They didn't want to risk undermining the existing structure while the new tunnel was under construction. And also that would have given them more of an opportunity to open up the new areas where the viaduct used to be to further recreational development and
which is
stuff along those
exactly
lines.
what's happening on Seattle's new waterfront. There are a lot of projects going on. It basically, everything you could think of as far as, connection to the waterfront, like as far as new park promenade, bike path, having connections with, restaurants, stores, neighborhoods, being, having a lot more street trees and pedestrian focused. So
yeah, the new look Alaskan Way is going to look very pretty. The tree-lined boulevard, you're right on the sound front there. And of course, all the original industrial piers that were built for much different purposes have been repurposed in recent years for, green space, for restaurants, for hotels. That whole strip, the Pike Place Market, that whole area there is really being refurbished and redeveloped, and it's still kind of in progress at this point. Since they've demolished the original viaduct, they've only been at it for a couple of years or so, but they are well on their way to completely remaking that area of the Seattle waterfront, and they are off to a fantastic start. The one last thing I want to say about the Alaskan Way Tunnel before I turn it over to you, Laura, and Corco for some other comments is that this is not free to drive. When they agreed to build this tunnel, they anticipated that they would need additional help financing it, so they built this as a toll facility. Now, when I was out west, I did not have the Washington State Good to Go pass, so I paid the pay-by-mail rate, which you can see on this slide. It's not cheap to drive this thing, but
oh no, $3.
Ugh, what are we gonna do? But the important thing to note here is that the new facility is a toll facility, whereas the original Alaskan Way Viaduct was not. That perhaps is the most significant change. It's certainly one of the more notable changes with certain people in the road enthusiast community. I won't name names, but I would like to mention that and turn it over to the two of you for additional comments.
I mean, I pretty much said my piece. Corco?
So I'm going to offer the contrarian take here, and that I liked the viaduct. And my thinking on this, I sure do miss the on-ramps from downtown, but beyond that, I don't know. I appreciate the desire for waterfront activation and things like that, but I don't know that the Seattle waterfront was in particularly bad condition to begin with, right? Like, I've walked up and down the waterfront a lot in my life, and there's no shortage of pedestrians walking under and around and on top of the viaduct, not on top of, but under and around the viaduct. There's no shortage of lively businesses along the waterfront. It may not be the prettiest, but it's only like a few feet wide. But I don't know. Maybe I need to see the finished product. But right now I'm cautiously skeptical that this is something that was actually worth the massive investment and time delays. But
and I do think that the Seattle example of waterfront renewal at the cost of removing an existing freeway is one that has been debated very contentiously in the AA Roads Forum and elsewhere. There's something about this particular example, and maybe Corco, you can understand this more than the rest of us, but is there something about Seattle that makes this situation unique? Because I feel like the Seattle example is one of the more hotly contested examples of this.
Well, yeah, I think it gets back to what I just said, which is that it's not like the Seattle waterfront was dead, or that it was somewhere you didn't want to go, or that you can see even in the picture you've got there, like there's pedestrians there, right? Like there's folks around, and even with construction going on, and then you had the just sort of massive expense of boring that tunnel, even before we had the sort of cost overruns that came from Bertha being stuck in the tunnel for a few years, and it's just like, man, was the juice worth the squeeze here? And
yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I want to defer final judgment until I see the final product, but I feel like Seattle's already a city where the waterfront was active, property values are already sky high and through the roof, and does this just sort of further gentrify a waterfront that was already doing that anyway? And I don't know.
Yeah, two things you mentioned there that I'd like to respond to. One, gentrification. Yes, that is a legitimate concern. Secondly, well, you need only look at Boston and the cost overruns in building those tunnels. And yes, the final product looks very nice, but I mean, I'm not trying to turn this into a Boston webinar, but I will ask the question here tonight whether that improvement was worth the ultimate price tag.
This city planner says yes and yes, but I think because it's so much more than just, I mean, you think about, yes, okay, so the waterfront, like you're saying, Corco, wasn't dead, there were people visiting and stuff, but it does, having the highway tunnel underground does take away, the pollution and public health concern, that sort of stuff. So there's like these hidden costs that we don't really think about until they're removed. And I think too, I'm planning, and not to get off topic, I mean, I'm planning to host a meet later in June in Lynchburg, Virginia, and it's amazing how they've transformed their downtown and waterfront. And so I'm hoping, Corco, that you'll end up being pleased with how Seattle turns out, because it's amazing what these sort of aesthetic quality of life changes will do and how many more people it will bring. That sort of stuff does bring out.
Yeah, no, I totally respect that point. I just question the need for those things, but that's we'll just have to agree to disagree on that. So
we are raising very interesting questions that are worth discussion and debate, and I wonder if maybe this is something that we should spin off into an individual episode at some point, because you're right, like you can't look at this and apply a one-size-fits-all solution to every single city in America, right? What works for Seattle, chances are, is not going to work for Baltimore, which chances are is not going to work for Boston, which chances are is not going to work for Philadelphia. You need to look at these situations on an individual basis. And, I understand that there's a lot of opposition to a lot of these alternate solutions, but it's really, to me, it boils down to doing what's right for the individual location in the individual circumstance. and not getting caught up in national trends, in national public opinion, and things like that. And Seattle has chosen a path that, frankly, looks nice. You know, say what you want about the trials and tribulations of Bertha and the tunnel construction, but the tunnel itself has turned out very well. And glory to Seattle. And hopefully they put the finishing touch on their urban redevelopment of the waterfront. And let's see what happens, and we can fully judge their work once it's completed.
Cool stuff.
Let's run quickly through some of these other highways. I know we've spent a lot of time on the major highways, which is good. I'm glad that we've had these discussions. But let's run quickly through some of these other highways. Corco, I like drawbridges.
I second that.
And there's a very nice one on Highway 99, just south of Seattle. Which I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but State Highway 99 is the former alignment of US 99.
That is correct, yeah. So this is the old US 99 route into town. Still the fastest way to get from Tacoma to Safeco Field, but that's very specific and neither here nor there.
Well, you have experience with that. Yeah. It's got a nice drawbridge over the Duwamish Canal. It was conceived as a freeway back in the days when US 99 was being upgraded to a freeway in the years after World War II. And the Washington State, or what became the DOT, I think it was still the State Highway Department, referred to their improvement of the U.S. highway corridor as the Good Roads Movement. And so the embryonic stage of development of what's now known as the Marginal Way has its roots in the Good Roads Movement of the 1950s.
Well, Good Roads goes way back further than that.
Does it go back further
Oh
than
my
that?
gosh, yeah. So what's so fascinating to me about the Good Roads Movement is that it really started in like the 1880s with bicycle enthusiasts. And because, we don't really think about it today, but bicycles were invented before automobiles. And, riding a bicycle on, like a bumpy, washed out dirt road is no fun.
Right.
So
yeah,
really,
yeah.
a lot of, like early, so the Good Roads Movement of like the late 19th and early 20th century was about improving roads so that people could ride bikes on them.
Bikey Wikeys.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, and then it was in the 1910s when you started to have more automobile usage that AAA joined onto the campaign. And
Right, that's where AAA has its roots.
Yeah?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. One of my favorite pictures that I took in Seattle in 2021 is the one that's on this slide right now.
It's gorgeous.
As I said, the sun occasionally comes out in Seattle, although it doesn't happen very often. Even on this particular day that I took this picture was July 4th, right in the middle of the summer. And it looks just like it does any other day of the year in Seattle, with that thick marine layer coating the sky. But I love this shot on northbound 99 as you approach downtown. The downtown Alaskan Way Tunnel is about a mile ahead of you. The port facilities of Seattle are on your left. The stadium complex is on your right. This is a very regal entrance into downtown Seattle that maybe I'll show you a little video of later on.
Ooh.
Yeah, this is a gorgeous shot.
Yeah.
518, there's not a whole lot to say about here. The most significant part of it is that it connects the interstates with Seattle International Airport. It's basically a western continuation of the 405 freeway. The 405 ends at an interchange with I-5 and with the 518 freeway. The right-of-way of 405 continues westbound as 518. which shortly thereafter intersects the terminal access roads for SeaTac Airport. This was one of the first highway corridors impacted by the SoundLink Transitway, which is, as we've alluded to before, it's the large-scale light rail system that connects all points of Seattle Metro. You can see the SoundLink viaduct in the lower left picture right here. It was one of the first major projects in the SoundLink corridor, was building the SeaTac line that connected the airport with downtown Seattle.
It was the very first.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was, excuse the pun, the pilot project. One other quick highlight I'd like to mention is that you notice the light towers for the runways. They're cantilevered on these bridge-like structures above the 518 freeway. This picture in the upper left is taken from a point just west of the exit or the interchange for the SeaTac Airport terminal access. Again, this is not something that you typically see in most American cities, but
They have this in Boise, Idaho, too, believe it or not.
Oh.
in Boise, really? I don't
They do.
remember that.
Yeah, they have an elevated structure that is runway lights.
Okay.
Yeah, it goes over a road. Yeah. Anyway, keep going.
And I included these pictures on this slide of the terminal access roadway itself, which is not part of 518, but it does connect into that freeway, connecting the terminal areas. I think I've said this on other live presentations in the past, but if you're looking for non-conforming, non-METCD signage, a good place to look for that stuff is in airport terminals.
Yes.
Because chances are that these local airport authorities will just do whatever the hell they want with signage, and you'll see a lot of oddball stuff that does not conform to national standards.
Yeah.
And I know Corco, you'll back me up on this. Also.
I fully, no argument here. That is true.
I think the only thing we need to talk about as far as 520 is concerned is the Evergreen Point floating bridge.
Yes.
So, Corco, why don't you talk us through that?
Yeah. So the bridge was originally built. You probably know the exact date. Sometime in the 50s or 60s. It was originally a toll bridge, with the agreement that the tolls would go away once the bridge was paid off. The bridge got paid off, the tolls went away, so for a long time it was a free bridge. And then, it's been almost 10 years now. 10 years, 12 years ago or so, they started tolling the bridge again in anticipation of building this new bridge, which was the first, the second electronic tolling facility in the region after the bridge down there by Tacoma. So what they did was they built this thing, rebuilt it fairly similarly to how it was configured before. It's not a whole lot different. They moved the bridge, I believe, a little bit to the north so that they could keep both open at all times. And this is now the first all cashless tolling facility here in Seattle. So.
Yeah, and so
I'm sure you have dates and things that are more specific.
Yeah, no, I think you have. I think you're on the right track in general. Yeah, the Evergreen Point expansion project is currently, as you can see in the pictures here, it's currently underway. I believe.
They're widening it again.
I believe the final completion for the 520 expansion is expected to be 2024, if I'm not mistaken. And there are other adjoining projects to this too, so it's not just the floating bridge that they're addressing. They're also addressing the western approach to I-5 across Union Bay. But
also, one other thing with this new bridge is there were ramps to nowhere to the west of the bridge that were for the R.S. Thompson Expressway, which we'll talk about that being a canceled freeway in a little bit. But basically, with the new bridge, they don't need they just they're taking down the ramps to nowhere. Although my understanding is that a section of it is going to be saved as a monument.
Yeah, maybe we'll want to talk about that more in a few minutes. But damn, look at that toll price. That pay by mail price. You see that on that slide?
$4.65.
Yeah, see, you know what? It's a good thing I have a decent amount of disposable income to spend on these road trips.
No, that's a legitimate concern, right? Like, for us, it's like, ooh, okay, $4.65 one time. But if you're commuting.
See, I'm glad you mentioned that, because my own spending patterns vary based on whether I'm commuting or whether I am doing it for pleasure.
Right.
So, and I'll turn it over to you guys to talk about 526 in a second, but I'll summarize it by saying very quickly that my spending patterns on toll roads while I'm on vacation in Austin, Texas, are very different from my spending patterns on toll roads in Westchester County, New York, Monday to Friday.
Right.
Continue. What do you guys want to say about 526?
It's got a cool name. They originally built 747s right there. In fact, you can see the 747 right there in that warehouse, but that is the OG 747 factory. Ooh. And so it was a big deal, and a big deal for sort of aviation history in Seattle. But otherwise, besides the being the Boeing Freeway and the 747 home, I don't have a whole lot on it.
Yeah. The Boeing campus there on the north side of Seattle near Everett is where the 747 was built. I wish I had the opportunity to fly on a 747.
You can still fly Lufthansa or something out to Europe. They're still operating them.
Are they operating to Kiev?
I don't know about that, but you can get a... Well, yeah, I don't know. You probably... But you can get over the ocean.
I have no idea why I'm asking that question.
You can get to Romania right now. I think they closed the Kiev airport. I actually looked at... This is how terrible a person I am. I looked at airfare to Kiev for May, just thinking that, if this is over, I might be able to get a good deal on airfare right now, and if not, I'll cancel the trip. But it wasn't cheap, so that's...
No, Corco, you probably should not go over in the war.
Are you?
Well, I was thinking it might end very quickly, but we're getting off topic.
Yeah, Corco's going to get elected to Parliament.
I always wanted to go to Ukraine, and was a little, for very selfish reasons, kind of sad to see this happen, but also very sad for the people over there that are actually impacted.
If Corco were to get elected to the Ukrainian Parliament, I hope that comes with perks that you'll share with us.
Well, I don't know.
You got to look into that, right?
It better be because you're supporting the Ukrainian people and not because you're one of Putin's puppets.
Well, yeah, I'm no Russian.
You don't sound very Russian to me.
No.
Anyway, 167, the Valley Freeway. When I drove this in July, I was very impressed with the view of Mount Rainier, which is also another potential environmental disaster for the SeaTac region, because that is classified as an active volcano. In fact, there are ancient lahar deposits that actually coat most of the Tacoma area. So if they've happened once, they can certainly happen again, depending on when the eruption actually happens. If it happens in, say, September, you wouldn't get a whole lot of lahar mudslide runoff from the peak. But if it happened in, say, March, at peak snowpack, then you'd have a whole lot more of that to contend with. Very standard suburban freeway running southward from Renton and the 405 towards the east suburbs of Tacoma. That's not a whole lot to say about this highway, I would imagine, right?
So a couple things. So one that is interesting is in my time living in Seattle, this is the only one that you ever heard to referred to by name. And I think that's even faded out in the 10 years now since I've lived there. But 10 years ago there were even a couple of signs here or there that discussed the Valley Freeway. And if you said Valley Freeway, people knew what you were talking about, which is not the case with any of the other named freeways. Besides maybe the Boeing and the Mukilteo expressways, but certainly in the southern part of Seattle Metro, this is the only one where if you say the name, people will know what the hell you're talking about. But I guess another thing is there is a major expansion project in the works that they've been getting ready to start on since I lived there 15 years ago, but finally is happening, and that's to expand 167 over to Tacoma as a freeway. Right now, it's a surface 4-lane road, and then to eventually connect it to I-5 and 509, and it sounds like they're going to break ground on it finally this summer. So that'll be exciting when that happens. So then there will be a full freeway connection from Tacoma to Puyallup, and then up the valley there.
Yeah.
Yep. And this was the first toll facility. This was the first HOT lane facility in Seattle. Also, is worth noting. They piloted this 09 or so, and this was where they first started it.
Oh, I didn't realize that the Valley had the first toll lane project. Okay. Well, that's a wrap of existing freeways in Seattle. Now, that's not quite where the story ends. I would like to highlight a few of the more prominent unbuilt freeways of Seattle, and of course, possibly get into some of the history of the Seattle freeway revolts of the 1960s. I've picked these 4 freeways that you see here on the screen just because of their relative importance and the overall structure of the ultimate plan system. There are other unbuilt freeways that may or may not have been meant to happen at some point or another, but I have the 4 most important ones that I'd like us to quickly run through here. The arterial map of the early 1960s looks like this, and if I can finally break out the highlighter here, I would like to highlight some stuff for you that I think is significant here. What I'm going to highlight in pink, well, that was terrible. Let me do that again. I have had way too much red wine tonight. So my drawing is not going to be all that great. I apologize in advance. But what you're seeing in pink there is I-5, or what became I-5. And you see a lot of different highways there that are drawn on the map as intended freeways. What you're looking at here, if I can highlight this in blue, this is the Union Ship Canal right here. So downtown is actually down here, off screen. So we're focusing, there's another half to this page that I'm going to show you on the next slide. But what you're seeing here is the northern, for lack of a better term, half of the Seattle area. Focused mainly on the northern half above the Union Canal. Really the only major north-south highway that saw completion was I-5 on this, based on this map. So that's that's the deal with that. Now if we go to the next slide, let's pick up where we left off. Again, I'm going to use pink here. So we're south of the canal now, so we're in downtown Seattle. This is Central Freeway. I-5 is right there. I'm going to use yellow to denote what became I-90. Right? And I'm going to use Well, the Union Canal is not on this slide, so I'm going to use blue instead for the Alaskan Way structure, which is right roughly in this area. Okay? Now, there are 3 main proposed north-south freeways to serve downtown Seattle. One of them is I-5, which you see got built 100%. The second one is the Alaskan Way, which got built more or less. I mean, as per the 1950s and 1960s construction, it was built 100%. There is a third highway that you can see highlighted in red here. That is this highway here. Let me switch over. That's this highway here. Now, on planning maps, this was referred to by 2 different names. It was known as the Empire Expressway on some maps. It was also known as the Thompson Expressway on other maps.
Well, because the Empire Expressway was the part south of Madison Street, and the R.H. Thompson was north of Madison Street.
Yeah, I mean, it was, both of those descriptions describe the same freeway corridor, the overarching freeway corridor, right?
Right. I mean, the idea was that it was going to roughly follow the route of Empire Way, which was later renamed Martin Luther King Jr. Way in 1983, but it would have cut a trench right through the middle of the central district.
Let's try to run through some of these, because I know you've got a lot of interesting info that you want to share with us.
I do.
Let's talk about the Bay Freeway first, because there's an expansion plan there that really interests me, and Corco, maybe as a Seattle Mariners fan, interests him as well. There was indecision about where to put the city's domed stadium. Where they ultimately put it in the form of the Kingdome was south of downtown, but there was also the idea of locating it adjacent to the Seattle Expo Center in this plan that you see in the lower left slide. And part of that plan would have incorporated an extended Bay Freeway out to the Puget Sound front, which you see on the two images here. Ultimately, the Seattle Center idea for the stadium got scrapped, and the Dome Stadium idea was moved to the location that it became in the mid-'70s as the Kingdome.
Very interesting.
But obviously the Bay Freeway is its own idea that has kind of evolved over the years.
The planning for the freeway began in 1954 and was in the city's comprehensive plan in 1957. What's so interesting to me about the Bay Freeway is that both its initial green lighting and then its cancellation were approved by the voters. So basically, it was funded by a bond measure that was passed by Seattle voters in 1960, but then by the end of the decade, citizen groups started voicing their opposition to the project, and forced in 1967 the Seattle Engineering Department to start considering other designs for it. So they determined that a cut and cover tunnel wasn't feasible. And then they started looking at an elevated option in 1970. That led to controversy, and then a civil lawsuit was launched, and basically because that at this point now you had a huge major deviation from what was approved in 1960. So, the King County Superior Court judge ruled in November 1971 that if you're going to, change the freeway from what the voters voted on for the bond measure in 1960, that it has to come to another vote.
I see. So
then in February of 1972, the project altogether was rejected by a 10,000 vote margin in a municipal referendum. And that same referendum also appealed the R.H. Thompson Expressway, because that too was approved by the bond voters in 1960. So it's just really interesting how you could see the difference in highways, and you had this interest and push in, the early 1960s, but then a decade later was when it was fully realized, like, hey, these aren't, the panacea for our cities that we think they are. These are, maybe we don't want to, build all these highways.
And the first shots fired in the Seattle revolt, the Seattle Freeway revolts, as we know, were when the fight over I-5 was happening in the early 60s.
Yes, and ultimately, as I mentioned earlier, the failure of them, because at the time there weren't any lids in the initial design, and the failure of that is really what pushed the locals to, stop some of these other freeways from being built. And there's some interesting history with that too. With the R.S. Thompson Freeway, right? So
yeah, let's talk about the Thompson, because I think that of the unbuilt freeways in Seattle, the Thompson is the one that deserves the most attention.
Indeed. And I should have mentioned very quickly with the Bay Freeway, the big downside, as we saw on the past map, was that the freeway was going to cut off a neighborhood, the neighborhoods from, South Lake Union would have cut it off from Lake Union.
Yeah, right. So you see like the solid red line on that slide, how it would have bisected South Lake Union neighborhood from the actual lakefront property that South Lake Union neighborhood actually claimed as their own.
Right.
So
yeah.
You can imagine that the residents of that neighborhood didn't take to that idea very well.
No, and then with the R.H. Thompson Expressway, that would have cut through the Lake Washington Arboretum in the Montlake neighborhood. And ultimately, if that freeway were built, it would have destroyed 3,000 homes and displaced 8,000 people. And it would have cut through, the Thompson, along with the Empire Expressway, would have cut through the Central District, Ravenna, Madison Valley, and the Rainier Valley. And really, it was that expressway that united University of Washington students and professors with neighborhood activists, and even the Black Panthers. They all joined together to oppose the concrete dragons, as they were called.
Wow.
And others, in this group of that really were activists against the highway included author Frank Herbert of the Dune series, and Saul Alinsky, as well as Black Panther Aaron Dixon, who ran for Senate in 2006. And there were really two groups. You had the Citizens Against the R.H. Thompson activism group that was run by Maynard Arso, and then the Citizens Against Freeways, which was headed by Margaret Carey Tunks. And so, again, these, initially approved by bonds, by voters with the bonds in 1960, and then the voters later rejected them in 1972. And that, but interestingly, with the R.H. Thompson, even though it came to a vote and was rejected in 1972, it wasn't formally canceled until 1977.
Talk a little bit about the stubs that you see on the slide on the right. Some construction was built for the Thompson Freeway in the area of the 520 floating bridge, which is what you're seeing there in the... one of them is an aerial picture from Google Maps from about 20 years ago. The other one is an aerial picture from helicopter about probably around the same time. The Thompson Freeway 520 interchange was significantly built to the degree that they could at the time. You made reference to it before.
I did.
But there is most of that stuff was removed when the 520 floating bridge project commenced a few years ago.
Yep.
But there are parts of it that have been preserved, and what, as far as I can tell, is an unprecedented example of preserving a freeway stub as a monument to freeway removal and cancellation.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's ultimately because, there was major, discussion and debate about, do we, and it's a debate about history in general, right? That preserving a section of it preserves that history. And so now when you go and visit the park, you know, get a glimpse into this history of the highway.
You see what could have been.
Right. And so a lot of people, you know, were on the side of we want them removed altogether. Like, we don't want any memory of this, right? But then others are like, no, we should have a memory of this because we want, you know, people of the future to know and remember, you know, what could have been and what was stopped and all.
It's a very emotional debate, right?
Yeah.
And especially in Seattle. Because they took the unprecedented step of preserving a freeway stub to remind the residents of Seattle of what their city could have looked like. You know, the Seattle, you know, downtown area is this lengthy spine north to south of just complete sprawl from coast to coast. And there's not a whole lot of real estate there, but Seattle tried to force as many as 3 very wide freeways through that narrow expanse of real estate.
Yeah.
And it's hard to imagine Seattle existing to the extent that it does today, had they managed to put all of those freeways in. I would like to call your attention to the slide you're looking at right now. The most dramatic part of the Thompson Freeway was reserved for the area around Union Bay, which the design for that in the 1960s called for an immersed tube tunnel beneath Union Bay. What you're looking at, you're looking south in this rendering. The highway that's running from left to right in this picture is the 520 freeway. The Thompson Freeway would have dove underneath the bay in this tunnel and then emerged on the other side and continued south through the hills of East Seattle, and passing through the 520 freeway interchange, as you can see at the upper right of this picture. This is an incredibly dramatic rendering, and you can perhaps see the amount of cost that it would have taken to make the Thompson Freeway a full reality across the east side of Seattle. It's awe-inspiring, it's dramatic, but I cannot imagine the cost that it would have taken to make this highway a reality. It's perhaps one of those schemes that's better left on a drawing board instead of real life.
Yeah, right.
What do you say, Corco?
No, I mean, I think I agree. You know, I guess I would say, do I have feedback on your end?
Not really.
Interesting. Okay, I can hear myself talking into the mic here. Let me make sure. Yeah, I mean, it certainly is a dramatic rendering. You know, I think ultimately the voters made their decision, and I think it was the right one, and it's tough. I do think that at the time that these were built, this area was considerably more rural than it is today. It was still developed, and developed enough that you know, the impacts would have been dramatic. Obviously, to attempt to do something like this today would be impossible. And I think ultimately, you know, things are what they are. I think this was not investing massive amounts of money in this project or many of the others. Probably ended up being a wise decision that kept Seattle and the DOT on the right path in the long term, and has given them, I think, a manageable amount of infrastructure to maintain, such that WSDOT hasn't had financial issues. They've been able to generally stay on top of maintenance and fund big ticket items as things come along, and part of that's because they're not having to maintain a giant freeway system that nobody wanted anyway. So,
Right.
Yeah, I mean, proposals like this one for the Thompson are spectacular. But again, I question whether they would have actually been all that useful in the long run. That's just me. The one
Speaking of questioning you, useful highways.
There's been talk off and on about this particular highway on this slide. You know, it's hard to know what to make of the Seattle Outer Bypass proposal because it's been talked about off and on, but from an engineering standpoint and from an environmental activism standpoint, this road stands next to zero chance of ever happening in real life. But it is worth mentioning because it is something that is brought up every once in a while.
I mean, it does largely exist on the southeast portion, right? There is the small stretch from Hobart to I-90 where you're still on a 2-lane road with passing lanes, but there is, if you're going from eastern Washington to Tacoma, 18 is the way to go, and it's largely a functional freeway, and that meets the needs. The north side is a pipe dream, and there's probably no value to it. Or benefit to constructing it beyond that it looks nice on a map, but that's kind of what that is.
Yeah, I mean, in 1998, the Washington State Legislature ordered a $500,000 study to investigate the benefits of extending it north to Everett, and the plan was dropped when the study found that on average only 5 minutes would be saved over the current routes. So
yeah, I believe it. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, and then also that it just isn't. Another $500,000 study in 2003 basically showed that it wasn't economically feasible either.
Yeah, I think it would take a lot more development to make something like this even realistic to discuss, but. The environmental challenges associated with building a highway through the foothills of the Cascade Range, to me, render this entire proposal a non-starter. But if Seattle Metro continues to grow at the rate that it's been growing, then perhaps Washington State officials will take a more aggressive approach. But we'll have to see how things develop in the coming decades.
Yeah, I would be very surprised to see them. It's not going to happen in our lifetime, so probably not ever. But even if Seattle continues to grow at a massive clip, I don't know that there's the functional demand, right? You're really looking at, it may end up serving some suburban benefit at some point, but that's not really the trajectory suburban traffic's going necessarily. And then on long haul type routings, freight traffic to Bellingham and Vancouver, there's alternate routes, be they Stevens Pass, be they Route 1 or way up north or whatever it may be. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Let's run through some bridges of Seattle. I've just picked this selection because I think it's it kind of hits on all of the greatest hits, if you will. This is not a complete selection, but it is a selection that'll help get you started at least.
Right. And I was going to say, can you go back to the list for a second?
Yes.
Oh yeah. No, I just wanted to also point out there that it doesn't include the floating bridges because we already kind of talked about those.
Yeah, so we talked about the Evergreen Point Bridge on 520. We talked about the I-90 floating bridges. Yeah. So that's 3 out of the 4 floating bridges in the state of Washington right there.
Yeah.
So we won't be recovering those. So it's important to differentiate the Fremont Bridge in Seattle with the Fremont Bridge in, say, Portland, Oregon, because they share a name, but they are in 2 completely different cities, and of course they look completely different from each other. These are bridges on the Union Ship Canal that I'm featuring in this set of pictures. You have the Aurora Bridge on Aurora Avenue, north of downtown.
Which has the Fremont Troll underneath it.
That's true, yeah.
That's the most important part of that bridge, yes.
Yeah. I think that most people call it the Aurora Bridge, even though its official name is the George Washington Memorial Bridge. Not to be confused with the George Washington Bridge on the other side of the country. The Ship Canal Bridge, as it's called, carries I-5 as it is a double-level bridge. As we mentioned before when we were talking about I-5, this is a bi-level bridge. The general use lanes cross on the upper level. The reversible express lanes cross on the lower level, as you can see on the picture on the right. This is a very standard-looking post-World War II, early interstate highway era double-deck structure. You see this design repeated in a lot of different places. This bridge's design reminds me a lot of the design of the Markham Bridge in downtown Portland on I-5, which I suspect we'll cover in a Portland episode coming soon. This is... Okay, on this slide, this is the picture. On the lower left is the upper level of the Ship Canal Bridge. On the previous slide, you had the picture of the lower level. The University Bridge is another movable bridge on the Union Canal. It gets its name from the University of Washington, which in the picture on the right on this slide is directly in front of you, in fact. The main campus of UW is right on the south shore of the Ship Canal on the north side of Seattle. And I would be remiss if we did not talk about cable-stayed bridges at some point in this presentation, but Tacoma has its own version of this design with the 509 21st Street Bridge leading eastward from downtown Tacoma. A relatively recent addition to the region's bridge canon.
It's a freeway to nowhere, but a good one.
Yeah, like it's useful when you leave downtown Tacoma, but then you reach the end of the freeway and you're like, wait, this didn't really get me anywhere useful.
So it will become a lot more useful in the near future when they finish up the SR 167 extension, because there will be a freeway connection from 509 directly out to Puyallup and then onto the freeway system out there. So that will make this more useful. But yes, as it stands, when I lived here, I always drove this highway to get gas, and that was the only reason I was ever on it, was because there was a big Arco station on the other side of the bridge. But that's okay.
I like how your mind functions.
What?
I like your style.
Well, thank you.
I approve. Arco's a good gas station.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I've had good experiences with them over the years.
Yeah.
Here's another nice view of that bridge. Asymmetrical in the sense that it's got a single tower and the two spans are of different lengths. But,
oh, yeah.
You know, when you design the cable suspension system for a bridge like this, you incorporate the asymmetrical dimensions into the stress level of the cables. So that everything kind of balances itself out artificially in that sense. I don't want to turn this into a engineering design course, but that's the basic idea of it. Okay, we have to talk about the West Seattle Bridge, and not for good reasons. I'm going to let the two of you lead the discussion while I step out for a minute.
Okay, well, Corco, all you.
Okay, so it's a formerly beautiful bridge, and as I was mentioning earlier that the Washington State Department of Transportation has done a great job sort of metering construction in order to not take on maintenance obligations beyond what they can handle, and have, as a result, been able to keep on top of things. The city of Seattle hasn't. And so what happened with the West Seattle Bridge, it's not even that old of a bridge. It was built in the 80s. but it has sustained some damage over the years and is currently closed while they figure out, how to upgrade and or fix it. It's currently open, I believe, to transit and only to transit. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, and I guess to bikes and pedestrians, but not the most pleasant crossing if it is even indeed open for that purpose. But yeah, I mean, I guess that's where it stands. It's a vital link across Seattle. It's been closed for almost 2 years now, and the money just wasn't there to properly maintain it. And so I guess that's the downside of building too much infrastructure. It's not a state highway, so it's going to be on the city's dime.
Yeah, so my understanding of the situation is that the high-level West Seattle Bridge is completely closed, and they're allowing some traffic on the lower level Spokane Street Bridge, but it's only open to buses and high occupancy vehicles. While they figure out a way to solve the structural issues with this bridge, which apparently they have a solution, and they're hoping to get this bridge open by the middle of 2022. But it's turned into a fiasco, to say the least. This is a bridge that's only barely 40 years old. Wow. So it should not be at this point where it is failing to the extent that it is, but that is the case. It's another one of those recent real wake-up calls for the engineering community, and it's difficult to see, no doubt. The city of Seattle is optimistic that they'll be able to keep the bridge operational once these repairs are completed. It really is the only link into and out of West Seattle without an extensive detour. At least that's my understanding of it.
Yeah. I mean, there is a water taxi that you can use, but if you're trying to go on anything with four wheels, yeah, or drive your own car in or out, that's the way to go. So.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so when I visited the bridge in July 2021, obviously it was very strange to see it completely empty of traffic, as it is in the pictures you see here. Stay tuned, I suppose. The repairs are in progress. The city of Seattle believes they have a solution in place, and time will tell if this bridge is able to reopen to traffic anytime soon. Speaking of bridges that are maybe opening to traffic anytime soon, perhaps the single greatest contribution in civil engineering history in the 20th century was made right here in the Pacific Northwest, in the suburbs of Tacoma. We did an episode not too long ago on the great suspension bridges of the United States, and I would direct you guys to that episode for some in-depth commentary on this bridge and many of the other suspension bridges in the U.S. that were built in the 20th century. The Tacoma Narrows Bridge is one of those projects that is, whenever you hear the name Tacoma Narrows Bridge, the hairs stand up on the back of your head if you're a structural engineer, even today.
Galloping Gertie.
It's been more than 80 years since the bridge's collapse, and it still has this otherworldly presence in our profession. And I don't even really care about what's on the slides at this point. I kind of just want to go on my own little soliloquy at this point.
Please do.
When I was a kid, one of my first vivid memories of bridges and what I would come to understand to be engineering Because, when you're a 4-year-old kid, you don't know what the hell engineering is. You see bridges and you think they're really cool, and you think, hey, I want to build those things someday. One of my first memories of engineering was seeing the video of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge collapse in 1940.
Yeah.
And I would like to say at this point, and I don't know that enough people do this nowadays, but I thank goodness that there were cameramen present on this day in November, because the written and audible description of this bridge's behavior in the seconds before it fell would not be believed by anybody if not for the video. I think that's an accurate assessment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like when you hear people say that this bridge was twisting in the wind and had the appearance of a roller coaster at Cedar Point in Ohio, no one would have believed you, and no one would believe you today. Yet there were cameramen present on this day, and I believe they were only there by coincidence. They were not there to document the final death throes of a suspension bridge. They were there because it was a windy day, and they were like, hey, let's get some footage of the Puget Sound on a windy day. And they happened to capture one of the most dramatic and most significant events in modern engineering history. And as an engineer myself, as a professionally licensed engineer who, when you become licensed, you understand that you have an obligation to protect public safety above anything else. And you take that and then you add to it the fact that I've worked on very significant signature projects in New York State in my still relatively young career. Tacoma Narrows is a hallowed ground in engineering history. And I am grateful that we had cameramen there that day, that we had the wherewithal and the determination to learn from this. Because if we hadn't, our recovery from this would have been far longer. And it would have been far greater reaching, I would argue. One of the examples that I bring up with this, with the collapse of a bridge like this, it's kind of like the Titanic. Like, in order for technology to advance, there had to be a major setback somewhere along the way. And we see this in other examples too, in other realms. It's not just in bridge construction, in ocean liner construction. It's in other phases of our existence as well. Sometimes the single greatest advance you can make is through setback. And the Tacoma Narrows was a great turning point in engineering history. Much like the collapse of the Quebec Bridge was a major turning point in the profession in 1907. The 1940 collapse of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge was a major turning point for the engineering profession. And we learned so much in the aftermath of that collapse. And we are still living off of the lessons learned in the Tacoma Narrows collapse today. And I don't like to say it in this particular way, but maybe you can understand why, as I am an engineer and I am a bridge engineer. But I don't think it's a stretch to say that I'm glad that this bridge collapsed, because we learned so much from its collapse, and we learned so much that was wrong with our ways of designing bridges, and we learned so much about what not to do from this bridge, that it enabled us in the 60 or 70 years since then 80 years, thank you, to design bridges that have stood the test of time, whereas this bridge was clearly not capable of doing so. And I thank goodness that we learned so many valuable lessons from the collapse of that bridge in 1940. And to me, that's kind of what engineering boils down to. Engineering really is a science when you dissect all the elements and all that stuff. Engineering is, we follow the scientific method, and we're not afraid to innovate, and we're not afraid to try new things. And the 1940 Tacoma Narrows Bridge was a perfect storm of innovation gone completely wrong. And it's okay to try new things and fail. Because when you fail, that's really when you learn. We learned a lot from the collapse of this bridge, and that's carried us through most of the next 80 years or so. And I hope that we are able to continue to learn from our mistakes in the years ahead. There was a notable bridge collapse in Miami not too long ago that we will be feeling the repercussions of for years to come in my profession as well. If there's one thing that we've learned, whether it is in the engineering realm with bridges, or it's with global foreign policy related to Eastern Europe, we know that history has a way of repeating itself, as we're finding out this week. And I just hope that we're able to learn from the mistakes of our past and our present. We clearly made mistakes with the 1940 Tacoma Narrows Bridge collapse. But we learned from them. And there has not been a significant suspension bridge collapse in America since then. And I hope that we can take that spirit with the recent failure in Miami and the recent issues at bridges in Houston and Corpus Christi, and we can learn from those mistakes and build a better community and build a better industry and build better products.
Build back better.
Build back better in a way, but build back safer for the public. That is the ultimate goal of any licensed civil engineer. It is the ultimate goal of yours truly. That is the oath that I take to all of you. Whether I work on a single-span bridge in Elmsford, New York, or whether I work on the Governor Mario Cuomo Bridge over the Hudson River in Tarrytown.
That's in West Elmsford, right?
It's not bad, right? I took the same oath on each of those projects. Learning from the lessons of bridges like Tacoma Narrows, it's my responsibility to look after all of the people who would use these bridges. Because public safety is the number one concern. And I think one of the lessons that came out of Tacoma Narrows is that public safety is the only thing that matters. Cost is nice. If you can save cost, if you can save labor, that's all well and good. But if you end up endangering the lives of the public, then what you've done is completely worthless. That's one of the lessons that I've taken from Tacoma over the years. And I'm fortunate to carry on that legacy today as the 21st century's class of civil engineers builds the next great series of landmarks for all of you to enjoy.
Beautiful.
Corco, what would you like to say about the current iteration of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge?
I suppose the current iteration, so when I first moved to Tacoma, they were just putting the finishing touches on the second span, so I had the opportunity to live there briefly while there was only one span operational, and it was toll free, and it was a nice nice drive. Then shortly after I moved there, they opened that second span. They added tolls. Originally, they allowed for cash, and then they just switched it to all electronic. But I can tell you, the 6 months or so that I lived there, when there was only one span open, it was a haul getting across that bridge. There's a reason they built the second one, that's for sure. It used to get very jammed up, very difficult to drive and get across during peak hours. So nice to see.
Yes. So when they engineered the 1950 bridge, they, in a sense, returned to the original, more costly concept for the original bridge. And so they built a bridge that was more, conducive to withstanding wind loads and all that fancy stuff that, the people of the ultimate design, decided to overlook to some degree. But yeah, with the suburban development along Highway 16, it became apparent that a second bridge was necessary at the same site. And so they developed the parallel span idea, which came to fruition in the early 2000s. It was completed in 2007. You can say about these two bridges that they are fraternal twins. But I do really appreciate the tribute that is paid to the 1950 structure in the engineering and the appearance of the new structure. The paint scheme in the new structure is very similar. Also, the design of the cross bracing of the towers is very similar. It brings to mind the architecture of the original. So they did a nice job with it, and it's a very impressive place to visit in person because you realize just how big the original bridge was. This was not just some bridge over like the public common in Boston. This was a very large structure in its own right that was completely torn to shreds by Mother Nature. Engineers must always respect the power of nature. And when you look at this scene on this slide of just how large the twin span complex is, it's amazing to me that the engineers of 1938, roughly, thought that their plan was a good idea. I mean, it's just mind-boggling to me. But, when you have decade after decade of very quick advancement with technology and whatnot, I think that's in some way you begin to think that you're invincible. And I know that's kind of what happened with the engineers of the Titanic and ocean liners of that class. They were like, hey, this is easy. We can do anything that we want. And sometimes it takes a major disaster to bring you back to Earth so that you can make the next significant advancements. And it turns out that that's exactly what happens in the aftermath of the Titanic and in the aftermath of the Tacoma Narrows collapse. I know it sounds weird to say this, but sometimes the greatest thing that can happen is a major setback.
Definitely. These are just very impressive. All your drone photography is fantastic, but these are just, I've driven over these bridges countless times, but I've never seen them from this perspective, and they really are quite something to see.
Well, it tells me that you need to buy a drone.
I guess so. Well, I would crash it. I guarantee you. There are a few things in life I just shouldn't be trusted with. The drone is.
Well, at the Waterbury Road Meet in early April, I guess I'll have to give you some lessons.
You can, but I'll probably crash it. Just so you know.
Well, we've come to the end of a long PowerPoint slideshow, and I want to thank everybody who's joined us live for this one. And we'd be happy to take your questions on anything that you've seen, whether it's the existing freeway system around Seattle, the unbuilt freeway system, or some of the bridge discussion that we've had just now. We value any of your comments, questions, thoughts on anything that you've seen in the last couple of hours. We'll be sure to address those things in the next few minutes as we transition into the video phase of tonight's presentation.
Woo!
I would like to remind you folks that we're back next Saturday with a virtual tour episode that's very special to me. This was easily my favorite single drive of my trip to the Pacific Northwest in July of 2021. And we're going to get to see it all again as you get to see the westernmost 180 miles or so of the western Interstate 84 across northern Oregon in the Columbia River Gorge. That's coming your way next Saturday, the 5th of March. We hope you can join us for that.
Wow, March already.
Yeah, I know. It's going to be March already, right? Yeah. I'm saying the same thing. Like, I just did the...
Didn't we just have New Year's?
We just had New Year's, and then we did the...
Oh, you skipped a slide.
Oh, we'll come back to that slide.
Okay.
In a little while.
All right.
Don't worry.
Okay.
There's one more slide on the PowerPoint, but I want to save that for the end. Geez, we've been on the air for quite a while, and I don't want to keep you guys terribly much longer, but I want to show you guys a few particular videos that I thought were instrumental.
I-90, perfect time to, recap some of that history, as I said I was going to do.
Oh, yeah, so, let's watch I-90 across Mercer Island into downtown Seattle. Go ahead.
Yeah, so like I said earlier, I said this history in the previous I-90 episode, but I wanted to recap it here. Basically, I-90's history in Seattle it spans about 30 years. In 1963, the first plan revealed for I-90 inspires horror.
Yeah.
But basically, right. You had a lot of opposition. It's going to bury Mercer Island under pillars of concrete. A white highway through black bedrooms in Seattle's central area. There was the unique thing, well, not really the unique thing, but I-90 was another one of these case examples of a highway that was going to affect, all across the socioeconomic, you had, spectrum. And because of that, you were able to have, activism that, helped, that included all these groups, right? Included, upper class white people and connected them with low-income and minority folks. But basically, in 1970, Mercer Island Mayor Davis persuaded the state highway director to put together a new team and to redesign it. And this resulted in a narrow roadway with lids and platforms surrounded by parklands with the pedestrian and bike trails. In 1971, the state negotiated with the Central Area Reps to build a 2,000-foot lid over the freeway west of Mount Baker Ridge, as well as a new park and elementary school. But yeah, the early 1970s was, basically you had a lot of long court battles. State laws proved to be only temporary obstacles as state judges rejected the claims of the I-90 opponents. But however, when they appealed and they went to federal court, they prohibited the state from purchasing property except in hardship cases for pretty much the remainder of the decade, from January 1972 to August 1979. So it's just really interesting because, the DOT greenlighted the project in November of 71, thinking that they would get, the federal courts would be on their side. And then the federal courts, said, no, we're not going to let you.
Yeah, right.
And then, to add insult to injury, the Federal Appeals Court required a new environmental impact statement in 1973 and more public hearings. And by 1974, you had the Seattle City Council tilted against I-90 being finished. So in the mid-70s, finally, you're able to get all the different groups in the room, right? So you had Governor Davis.
Hey, look, it's Lake Washington.
Look at that! The University of Washington's Office of Environmental Remediation got all 6 jurisdictions to sign an agreement. So that includes Seattle, Mercer Island, Bellevue, King County, Metro, and the state of Washington. And then by 1977, that environmental impact statement was ready for federal approval. And then Mayor Charles Royer got elected, and he campaigned for the feds to delay that approval because he wanted the funds to be used to improve the existing road and bridge, add transit, and spread the remainder of the money across the Puget Sound. And while the Seattle state reps agreed to this, no one else in the state did. So
I would just like to interrupt at this section to say that I'm looking at Laura's notes right now, and holy fuck.
I believe it. This is a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Corco, I really wanted to have Corco on because he's the resident Seattle expert, but Laura's giving you a run for your money, man.
Well, Laura does her research. I just sort of roll in and spell off comments. So I'm happy to pass that credit over.
Yeah, well, there's room for everyone at the table,
If
everyone came in with their notebooks, we'd be fighting over, wait, no, but I wanted to say that detail.
I know. See, the thing is that if everybody showed up to every webinar as prepared as you are, every single webinar would be fucking 6 hours long.
That is very true.
But it's a testament to just how well prepared Laura is.
I appreciate your commitment.
I would just like to say on the record that Laura is incredibly well prepared.
Thank you.
She's done her homework voluntarily, I would say. I did not, I have to, full disclosure, I did not ask her to do any of what she did, but she's done a fantastic job. But anyway, I'm sorry. Can you?
No, yeah. So yeah,
maybe we can.
I can abridge. Yeah, I can turn this down. There's not a whole lot left. Basically, that in 1980 there was, the thought that, that the federal money was going to be lost, basically, President Carter clamped controls on federal public works spending to fight inflation. But then Reagan got elected.
Well, President Carter has something to do with another major metro area that I've been to recently, but we'll talk about that when we do the Atlanta webinar at some point.
Right. But
Jimmy Carter screwing up plans from coast to coast.
Yeah.
Can I just quickly point out that as we roll into Seattle here, Edgar Martinez Drive is named after the greatest Seattle Mariner in Seattle Mariners history, and that's the reason that you see signage for E. Martinez Drive.
Boo!
And he is a very worthy western terminus to I-90.
That's awesome. I think that's awesome.
I am only booing because Edgar Martinez was involved in the play that I believe is known throughout Major League Baseball history as The Double.
The Double, yeah.
And of course,
come on, that's the best moment in Seattle Mariners history. The Yankees have 27 World Series championships they can follow, and they can give us that little love, can't they? We're not asking for the world here.
Yes. So I'm glad you said that because, yes, the double came at the expense of the Yankees, but I would... Yes.
As an Orioles fan here, that pleases me.
That's right. I'm being ganged up on.
You are.
Here. This is very, inhumane of me. But I would like to say that, without the double, perhaps the Yankees dynasty of the 90s doesn't actually happen. So it's a trade-off.
Wait, why is that?
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Wait, why how did the double cause the dynasty to happen?
Well, they fired their manager and they
overhauled
the roster.
Oh.
All right. So you think the transition from Buck Showalter to Joe Torre is the cause of the Yankees' success in the 80s?
I would say that Joe Torre proved to be a much better manager under duress than Buck Showalter.
Hey, I like Buck Showalter.
Yeah, how many championships did he win for Baltimore?
Well, we didn't make it to the World Series, but we made it to the playoffs a couple times in the 2010s.
Well, you know.
It's a big deal for, a team that has some pretty big losing records.
Listen, when he wins a world championship anytime soon, let me know. All
Hey.
right, just saying. I mean, he does have a way of, bringing major league clubs back to relevance. I mean, we saw him do it with the Yankees, with the Diamondbacks, with Texas, and then most recently with Baltimore.
Let's go O's.
And then
Let's go O's.
the resident Baltimore Orioles fan here.
Woo.
And it remains to be seen. Full disclosure, it remains to be seen how he will do with the Mets, but let's see him do it. Let's see him win.
Woo.
Because he hasn't been able to do it with superior talent than he had with the Mets going into this season. But anyway, sorry.
Oh
We got
yeah,
off on a
no.
tangent
So
there.
I'll wrap it up with the right. So I thought it was gonna be canceled in 1980, and then Reagan, who's a fiscal conservative, initial thought there is, oh well, he's not gonna. But he actually, was convinced that the last 7 miles were vital. And while the Secretary of Transportation at the time, who was from Washington, Secretary Brinson, basically he convinced him, and the state took a risk to start on I-90 and the promise that the money would come. The Secretary, looked for every possible source of funds and made it happen. And so then from there, basically, you had, the construction through the 80s. You had the new bridge, the new bridge built. I may have referenced that earlier, and the bridges were complete. The 2 bridges, the new bridge plus the
Lake Washington
overhaul.
Bridge.
The Lake Washington Bridge. Yes, thank you.
Yep.
Completed in 1993. So
And that was the final link in I-90
yes,
between Seattle and Boston.
indeed.
And of course, the appendix section in East Boston was completed later, but the transcontinental piece of it between I-5 in Seattle and I-93 in downtown Boston was complete at that point. Can I play the I-405 video?
Yes. So while I've spent all this time with my amazing history, I have another surprise that I want to share. And that is, I want to sing y'all a song.
Okay, so you need to kind of give us a little bit of background.
Yeah.
first.
So, Seattle area band, Death Cab for Cutie, which is an indie rock band.
So this was a band that was not born from the grunge movement?
No, they're more like indie pop rock.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they had some some crossover success into popdom in like the early 2000s.
So while we're watching a video of I-405 northbound through Bellevue,
I want to sing their deep cut, 405.
Please go.
All right. Full disclosure, I've not sung. So there are videos of me sung on YouTube that are a lot more polished than this. This is my first time singing. Now I'm all like hyper, so hopefully I don't mess it up, right? And, I'm going to sing this a cappella. Don't want to mess with, not that I think that, the copyright people are going to come after us if we...
See, but you have the best damn voice out of any road geek in here, so...
Oh,
you're the one person who can do it justice, so
all right.
Please go ahead.
So, it's a song, 405. It's from their 2000 album. We have the facts and we're voting yes. I took the 405 and drove a stake down to your center and stated that it's never ever been better than this. I hung my favorite shirt on the floorboard, wrinkled up from pulling, pushing, and tasting. You keep twisting the truth that keeps me thrown askew. it led me to an alcoholic summer. I missed the exit to your parents' house hours ago.
That doesn't sound good.
Well, thanks a lot. Fine, I'll re-sing
Not
it.
you. Talking about the lyrics, not
Right,
you.
if you look up the lyrics on Genius, Ben Gibbard, he says that, there's a lot of toxic shit going on in this song, right? The relationship was not good for him. Right?
It sounds like it.
So now I'm gonna re-sing the verse, right? Gives me a good excuse to sing again, right? Now I'm laughing so hard. Okay. Misguided by the 405, 'cause it led me to an alcoholic summer. I missed the exit to your parents' No, I can't stop laughing. Parents. Damn it, Dan. Maybe because it's also not believable that, if I was actually in this song, right, that I would miss an exit. Road geeks don't do that,
Yeah,
right?
who misses an exit? I mean, seriously.
Right.
Corco never misses an exit.
No, I never.
All right, I'm doing this one more time. And if I fuck it up again, I'm just going to keep going. All right. All right. Misguided by the 405, 'cause it led me to an alcoholic summer. I missed the exit to your parents' house hours ago. Red wine and the cigarettes, hide your bad habits underneath the patio, 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 patio. You keep twisting the truth. That keeps me thrown askew. You keep twisting the truth. That keeps me thrown askew.
Very nice, dear.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. That is my premiere of singing live on YouTube, and not, not with, any studio editing.
Well, you did a fantastic job.
Well,
and
thank you.
I would say I'd much rather listen to you sing than have Corco try to sing. So
No. Laura can have that one. Good job.
Let's see.
What's funny though? Speaking of failures, and sometimes you need setbacks in life, right?
Yes.
In order to succeed. I had to I laughed, right? I had to restart that verse twice, but I feel like the third time was probably the best of the three takes.
Sometimes the best take is not the first one.
Right.
And that's okay.
This is true. Yeah.
So.
If anyone else is, not to, shameless plug here, right? If anybody's interested, I'm actually singing at Carnegie Hall in New York City with my choir.
Would you like to plug that real quick?
Sure, yeah. So Saturday, April 9th, that evening, I think the concert's at 8 o'clock, at Carnegie Hall in New York City.
Yes, the
Carnegie Hall.
Yeah, the Carnegie Hall.
The Carnegie Hall,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
The choir I'm in, Deer Creek Chorale, is singing with, in combination with a couple other choirs. We're singing Robert Cohen's Alzheimer's Stories, and tickets are on sale. If you are in New York or thinking of taking a trip to New York, and you should come.
It's April 9th.
Yeah.
Right? This is a Saturday evening, I believe.
Yes, Saturday evening.
Yeah. We should turn this into a impromptu road enthusiast meetup.
Yes.
At Carnegie Hall. So if you can make it, and you want to hear Laura and her beautiful voice and her colleagues, it's a great opportunity. I personally, Roadway Wiz, will be in attendance. I know that several people in the road enthusiast community will be there as well. We hope to see you guys come out and support Laura and her choir and her gorgeous voice and all that.
Thank you.
Yeah, well.
Do let me know in the chat.
It's better that you're on stage than me, okay?
Do let me know in the chat how that sounded, because I am curious. Because like I said, I've never sung live on YouTube before.
I think it came out all right.
You think so?
Yeah, it was all right.
Just all right.
I'll have to listen to it back because there were one or two minor discrepancies.
Oh yeah.
But
I know, right?
You sounded amazing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Corco, you're going to this concert at Carnegie, right?
I'll have to check my calendar. This is the first I've heard about it, so I'll take a look.
You motherfucker! I thought you would have checked your calendar weeks ago.
Well, I don't pay attention to what's going on. I don't know what's happening.
Well,
but,
you know what? You know what? To be fair, I don't pay attention either. So you know what? I'll give you a pass on that.
You keep twisting the truth.
but Laura's going to do fantastic. That I'm confident in. So
that was directed at me, by the way.
I figured as much.
The drive north on Highway 99 to the Alaskan Way and through the tunnel is probably my favorite single Seattle freeway drive. So, let's relive that drive from the 4th of July, 2021, in this video here. I would like to say that, in the interest of full disclosure, I'll say this, that Roadway Wiz's birthday is on the 5th of July.
Woo!
And the channel was founded on the 10th of July. And this video was filmed on the morning of the 4th of July.
Oh.
So you may see this video as sort of like a birthday tribute or of some sort, you know?
Yeah. That's a good tribute actually for all three of us, because my birthday is June 30th, and Corco, you have an early July birthday too, don't you?
Oh, I'm clear out in late July. I'm somewhere in the third week of July.
Oh,
boo!
You Leo, you.
Yeah.
Cancer is the superior of the zodiac signs.
That's right. Yeah. You don't mess with Cancer. In more ways than one. But yeah, I just love this drive through downtown Seattle. One of the things that I wish I could do, I think that as road enthusiasts, we all have those like bucket list things that we wish we could go back in time to experience. For some people, they cite the old Embarcadero Freeway in San Francisco. There's the example of, well, maybe more contemporary road enthusiasts would cite the Sheridan Expressway in New York City. I cite the original Alaskan Way viaduct as one of those things that I wish I could go back in time and experience once. But my first visit to Seattle was in 2021, once the tunnel was already in use, and that's the best I have for you. I don't have footage of the original viaduct, but I do have footage of the new tunnel that I paid a hefty toll price to drive, so I don't want to hear any shit from you people about how you don't like this video. But,
Why'd you glare at me?
I'm looking at you, Baltimore Orioles fan.
Oh.
But no, you know what? For me, to be able to drive these highways and to be able to drive these toll bridges and toll tunnels, to me it's a privilege, because I know that so many people in the road enthusiast community don't have the means to be able to do this kind of thing. And I understand that I'm getting a little serious and a little sentimental at this point, and I don't really give a shit about that.
Oh.
You know, one of the things that I've noticed, especially in the last 4 or 5 years with my channel work and my channel on YouTube, is that I have provided a lot of valuable content, of valuable real estate from a roads perspective that most people would not be able to access themselves. I won't mention names here, but I can think of several people in the community, especially, that I have great respect for, who have not, especially since the COVID pandemic started in 2020, that they have not had the ability to travel outside of the Northeast part of the country. For a variety of reasons, and I don't wish to get into those right now, but
well, hey, I mean, you know what? Here's the thing. Your channel has meant so much to me because I don't have as much freedom and, financially or, physically, time-wise, to be able to travel as much as I would like.
Yeah.
But being able to watch these videos makes me feel like I'm on the drive, and which is really cool. And I think that as a result, it means that it feels like I'm there. Like maybe I don't have the money right now or the time to be able to go to all the places that I want to. But being able to, so pretty.
I surprised you with this one.
Yeah, but see, this is a perfect example. Like, if I, God forbid, ended up on my deathbed tomorrow, I won't feel like I've missed out because I've been able to experience these amazing bridges through your videos.
You've been able to experience the Tacoma Narrows Bridge tonight, virtually.
Yeah.
And while I wish that everybody in the road enthusiast community would be able to come here and see this hallowed ground in engineering history, I thank goodness that this footage exists so that all of you can enjoy it virtually. Because I realize that not everybody in the road enthusiast community has the ability to travel, to get on a plane from New York to Seattle to see this firsthand. But I feel like all of you have, maybe this isn't the right way to say it, but if you like roads and you like bridges, at least subconsciously you have an obligation to see this place. And so if I can give this place to you guys virtually, if you're not able to see it live, that means a lot to me.
Yeah.
And maybe now you guys are starting to finally figure out the purpose of this whole channel thing.
Yeah.
Because it started 11 years ago, or going on 12 years ago, as a very innocent thing that was originally intended to be just this localized New York City, Buffalo, New York kind of thing, like recapping my favorite drives as a kid. But as I've gotten to know so many of you people in the roads community over the years, I have found that there's a real desire for you people to just see parts of the country that nobody else has been willing to cover. And yes, a lot of that, there's a lot of overlap there with, toll roads, roads that you guys might not be willing to necessarily travel on your own, or maybe you don't have the means to travel on your own. But I kind of feel like that's where I come in, and I can kind of give you guys that experience. And I know that I've said this, what I'm about to say, in past, interviews, webinars, virtual tours, what have you. I don't see anything that I've done as all that remarkable, but I see myself as being competent in a lot of things. And let me tell you something. In an age of incompetence, when there's a lot of bullshit out there on YouTube, sometimes the greatest thing that you can find on the internet is competence. And I like to think of myself as a competent presenter of content. I can do all the different things. I can stream live, I can film stuff, I can photograph things, I can, with cooperation from the folks at gribblnation.org, I'm able to post new things in blog format and podcast format. I can do a lot of different things, and I've learned so much about how to do a lot of things in multimedia for this hobby. And I feel like my greatest skill set is bringing these things to you guys who are not perhaps as privileged. and who don't have the ability to get on a plane and go to Tacoma to see the video that we're driving right now. Because I'm really passionate that I think that you guys should be able to see this. So if you're not able to go out and see this live, then the next best thing would be to see footage of it live. So that you know exactly what it looks like. And that's something that it's something that I've always really been passionate about, but especially in recent years, since the COVID pandemic has started, it's something that I've really cared a lot about, and I hope that my enthusiasm for that purpose has rubbed off on some of you folks, and that you've recognized that, and you've enjoyed this content on this channel the last couple of years as a result of that. So I know I went off on a soliloquy there for another one of my classic whiz soliloquies that I've not been a stranger to over the last couple of years. But I hope that in the long term that you guys get something out of this other than seeing road signs and seeing, like, I don't know, button copy signs or, strange, like, fonts on road signs and...
Fairies! Ooh.
Yeah, Puget Sound fairies.
Speaking of cool, unique signs.
Yeah.
You don't get to see every day.
That's right.
Hey, there's room for both, right?
In a way, there is. You're right.
Ooh, another unique sign.
Yeah, and I don't want to dismiss that. But I think that really if you think about what this channel really is about, it's about giving the ordinary person who doesn't have the ability to travel an idea of what our American metropolises really look like.
Yeah. And on the flip side, maybe someone has...
And I don't want to name names again, but when I take these trips, I have certain people in mind.
Yeah.
And I know in the back of my mind that, okay, this person has a website, and I know that if certain things weren't the case, that they would want to be here. But since they can't be here, then I would like to give them the next best thing, which is content like this, where they can sit in front of a computer screen and experience it for themselves.
Indeed. And
without all the editing and without all the sound effects and without all the soundtracks and all that stuff. Let them figure all that out.
Yeah.
Because YouTube is a beautiful thing, and that you can watch videos at double speed, at half speed, and all that stuff. Every individual person has their ability to customize their own playlist of music, and or if you're like me, or if you're a nerd like me, you can listen to 1010 Wins out of New York City, streamed online, all news all the time. So you can customize your experience like that, and I feel like one of the blessings in disguise of the COVID pandemic is that it's allowed a lot of people to really realize what this channel's mission statement really is. This is your ability. This is your chance to explore America. Yeah. I've done all the hard work for you, if you think about it.
Yeah.
Hell, I was just a week ago tonight, I was in San Antonio, Texas, filming stuff for future YouTube uploads and future YouTube webinars and virtual tours. Because I want you guys to see it. Yeah. If you can't, I would love for you guys to see it in person, but I understand that a lot of you don't have that ability. And I am passionate about giving you guys the opportunity to see it.
Well, there's something else too that you haven't hit on but I think is very relevant to this line of thought, right? so we're talking about, wanting to see a place that we aren't able to get to. But another cool thing about these videos, right, is that it can be a reminder of a place that we have been to. So so I've actually never been to Seattle. I have an interesting story for why I am very interested in Seattle.
Yeah, and I want you to tell that story, so go ahead.
Yeah, so my grandparents were farmers. And most of their, if they went away on vacation, it might have been for like a quick weekend to Ocean City or to my, uncle's cabin up in central Pennsylvania. I mean, particularly my grandfather. Now, my grandmother, I mean, they would also we had family in Florida, so they might make a quick, for very special events, like a wedding or a baptism or something, they might, make a quick trip to Florida. But basically, they didn't really travel much, right? Because they had a farm, they had animals. It had to be a significant reason if they were going to go far. Like I said, immediate family in Florida from Maryland. But there's one exception. And that one exception is the time my grandparents went on vacation to Seattle with my grandmother's best friend and her husband. And they had the time of their lives and really had a wonderful time being on the other side of the country, seeing the Pacific Ocean, seeing the Pacific Northwest, and just how different it is from the Mid-Atlantic and from the East Coast. And, this is the days of film, so they took like what seems like 1,000 pictures. Like, my grandmother had like a giant shoebox, right? Of like,
oh my goodness.
Of like all of like, like you had like negatives and extra photos, and that's like the stuff that didn't make it into the photo albums.
Goodness.
Because it was such like a big deal trip for them. And I think about how if my grandparents were still alive, that they would have loved to have seen a video like this, because it would have been such a pleasant reminder of, like driving down the highway and seeing the Seattle skyline, seeing, some of this stuff up close. And, so I think
what would they think of Seattle today?
That was the next thing I was going to say.
Yeah.
All the changes, right?
Mm-hmm.
The things that have changed that are different. And, what would they think of that today? And so it has that purpose as well. Of being able to relive the, places where we might have been. And so for me, this is very much like I don't know what you'd call that, like a nostalgic vicariousness. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Because like I said, I've never been there, but because my grandparents, talked about Seattle so positively and how they just had this really wonderful vacation that Flossie and Bill planned for them, and like doing all these things that they otherwise wouldn't normally do, and that like something about them telling me those memories, and that sticking out Seattle in my mind is like, this is a place and I want to eventually get there. And
imagine if your grandparents got to see this view.
Yeah.
The lower deck of the Ship Canal Bridge on the express roadway.
Yeah.
But yeah, you have a very personal story about Seattle that not a lot of people have.
Yeah, and it's a unique story in general, because it's like I have a fondness for this city I've never been to.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah. And, I had never been to Seattle until, this episode is being broadcast in February 2022. My first visit to Seattle was July of 2021, and I absolutely loved it, and I can't wait to go back again at some point. But I suppose if there's one thing I'd like to say to the road enthusiast community who might be watching tonight, this is your channel. This is your way to get out and explore. That's really kind of what I want it to be remembered as. That you can go to any metro area in America that you please, whether it's Seattle, whether it's The new stuff that I've added this past week, San Antonio, Austin, Texas. My first major metro area that I covered was New York City. So there's that. There's Miami, Florida. There's Atlanta, Georgia from a couple months ago. I mean, you can pick any major metro area that you want out of a hat, and it's there. It's in the catalog, and I just hope that the significance of all of this is recognized. Yeah. Because I'm not doing this for me. You must understand that. Like, I'm not in this for the money. I'm not in this for the fame and the fortune. I've already got all of that stuff. I've got the money, the fame, and the fortune professionally. Okay. That's important to say because most people who have websites and most people who have YouTube channels do not have those three things. Right? Like, you must understand that. I'm not trying to tell you that I'm better than those people. That's not what I'm going for. I'm just stating a fact when I say that. So I can use this channel for, frankly,
for the greater good.
For pure joy.
Yeah.
That's really what this is. What you're seeing in this video is a manifestation of the love that I have for my community. And I would not do this if I didn't love everybody as much as I do.
Aww.
And I hope that comes through. Whether it's in the webinar format or whether it's in the virtual tour format or whether it's, in some other format, some other way. But,
Corco, you still with us?
I am here.
Yeah. No, I mean, we've rambled on forever. I'm curious your thoughts about reliving these roads since you last lived in the Pacific Northwest.
No, I mean it's nice. I think the last time I was in Seattle was 2019 or so, and it's certainly interesting to see what's happened out there since then, and it makes me want to take a trip to Seattle again.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? I know we joked about this earlier, but I hope that the Seattle Mariners make a playoff run in the 2021 season, and that I hope that you can go home to experience Seattle Mariners home playoff game at some point.
I will be there if it happens. I will be terrified. I won't know what to do.
I know you will, because I know you talked about it this past season. That the Mariners were in the wild card hunt until the very end of the season, and I know that you were talking about what would happen if the Mariners clinched a spot. So, dude, you don't have to convince me. I know you'll be in Seattle for a home playoff game if it happens, or when it happens.
Darn tootin'.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
well, I'm glad that this video has brought you back some, happy memories.
I do want to start to wrap up this show because we're now in our 4th hour of live coverage and we've gone way too long.
Oh, you look at me?
I'm looking at you, Laura.
I know, me with my lecture notes here.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Any closing thoughts that Corco and Laura have for Seattle Metro? You're free to contribute. Go ahead.
You first, Corco.
No, I mean, I'm just delighted to say that it's a place that I had the good fortune of calling home for a while. It's somewhere I could see myself living again. I think, as I said earlier, Washington on the whole is just a fantastic state to live in, and especially to be interested in roads in, because it's got just a hell of a lot going on. Seattle has got everything. It's got bridges, it's got ferries, it's got viaducts, it's got tunnels, it's got, interesting signs. It's got the whole gamut of stuff. Yeah. And so just delighted to have been here and to see everything. So.
Yeah, I mean, Seattle is really a great place to explore if you're a road enthusiast because it's got the whole spectrum of things that any person who is interested in signage, roadway construction, road history, really any element of the spectrum that you can imagine. The only thing that I regret about Seattle is that it's so damn far away from everywhere else. You know, because it is in the Pacific Northwest, which in a way is kind of like the contiguous 48 states' moon colony. Because it's so damn far away from everywhere else by car. And by plane, for that matter. I mean, geez, it's a 6-hour flight just to get there from New York. But yeah, I mean, I would say that if you had the opportunity to get out to Seattle and Washington State, and we'll talk more about Oregon in the next couple of weeks of live shows, but you know, that whole region of the country is just unbelievably gorgeous. From a scenery standpoint, from an urban standpoint, from a road development standpoint, it's all just fantastically fascinating. And I hope that more people have the opportunity to go out that way and explore in the years ahead.
I definitely am looking forward to being able to get out there with Mike and Reedy. It'll be a little bit of like a pilgrimage for me.
Absolutely.
And
yeah.
Thank you so much, Dan, for letting me be on the panel for this episode, because it's really an honor and a privilege to, you know, be able to, you know, be here with you all.
Well, I would like to thank our panelists, Laura from Maryland, who is joining me here in New York at the headquarters of Wiz HQ, and Corco from Connecticut by way of Idaho and God knows where else. Thank you to both of you for helping contribute to this episode. It was great to have the two of you with us.